Suddenly, the gates of hell appeared in heaven. From these gates came crowds of creatures known as Basabe. With amazing speed, they trampled humanity. It seemed that this was the beginning of the end. However, humanity continued to resist. During the invasion, each human gained their own level and new abilities that gave them the ability to fight on equal terms with the Basekai. The world survived, and now the value of each person was determined according to his level and his abilities. Among all the possessors of the new abilities, there were 10 strongest, nicknamed the Numbers. They were heroes who had saved humanity more than once and the hope for everyone in the new reality. The boy looked towards a tall building with a picture of the Numbers team. I dreamed that one day I would be together with these heroes. However, at that moment, his desire was nothing more than a fantasy. The name of this boy is Koigami Hiroya, and he was one of those saved by the heroic Numbers. From that moment, the guy promised himself that one day he would join this team to save humanity from monsters. However, the reality was much more. Now each person's strength could be safely tracked. And while the strong became more and more successful and visible, the weak became more and more miserable. Hiroya was one of those unfortunates. It had already been 6 years since his level had risen to the 8th level. A person with such a low level at that age was completely useless in the new world, where everyone had their own superpowers. The sudden, deafening roar of a siren interrupted the boy's thoughts. The announcement of the monster invasion took many people by surprise. In the middle of the street, a girl frightened by the loud sound was crying. The mother was trying to calm her daughter down, assuring her that the heroes would surely come to help them. Suddenly, huge claws appeared in the space behind the frightened people's backs. The next second, a huge monster burst in and pounced on the people. Turning to the monster, Hiroya heard cries for help coming from there. Without a second thought, he rushed towards the defenseless people, without thinking about the consequences. With his arms outstretched at his sides, and his body trembling, he blocked the monster's path. His gaze was filled with terror. The monster opened its mouth and let out an angry roar. The frightened boy was ready for anything, just to have any strength to fight this giant at that moment. However, the next second, the silhouette of the hero who had used his skill appeared in front of him. It was so unexpected that Hiroya barely had time to see it. Still, the long hair and the blue suit made this hero too recognizable, even at that speed. This was Seika Inui, a member of the Numbers, and one of the strongest people in humanity. And for Hiroya, he was also a man she admired endlessly. 6 years ago, the city was attacked by a monster called Basabe Special. Even the awakened people couldn't resist fighting him. Many died in the unequal battle. At the time of this battle, the boy was only 11 years old. By a terrible coincidence, he found himself at the epicenter of events. Hiroya remembered few details of that day, but he saw perfectly how the Numbers of that time fought against the Basekai. Among the best heroes fighting that day was Seika Inui. Thanks to numerical superiority and teamwork, the humans were getting closer to defeating the monster. Then Hiroya noticed that the creature was looking in his direction more and more often. Suddenly, the special Besabala abruptly left the fight and pounced on the boy. That was the last thing I remembered about the fight. The boy woke up in the arms of one of the heroes, and No said that the battle was over and the worst was over. Later, Hiroya learned the name of his savior, who immediately became an idol for the boy. The high-pitched screams of a woman made him wake up and look around. The crowd gathered in the street looked longingly at their hero, who had once again saved the city. One of the fans pounced on Inui, knocking down the already lost protagonist. When he came to his senses, the boy thought that although the popularity of the 10 members was huge, he also had something to say to his idol. Hiroya jumped up and, picking up his notebook with notes on how to get into the Numbers, called the hero. When she heard his name, she looked at the boy with surprise. The boy, with a trembling voice, began to say that he had been trying to become just as strong for years, but that he had failed. Without interrupting his admirer, the hero calmly listened to his troubles. At the end of his long monologue, the guy shouted that he wanted to become one of the Numbers. However, Hiroya did not wait for a response from the idol, as he was once again knocked down by one of the fans, holding his head. Scared, the boy got up. Suddenly, he heard someone calling him from behind. She was the little girl whom the boy had selflessly blocked the monster's path. The young man was glad that at least someone appreciated his contribution, but the girl suddenly ran past. Looking back, Hiroya saw that he was running towards Inui. That moment made the guy finally disappointed in his abilities. Lost in his thoughts, he walked to the school, listening on the street radio about the incident in Shibuya. At that very moment, a reporter was interviewing Seika Inoue, saying that her victory was brilliant as always. The hero modestly replied that it was their mission, and that they were ready to give their lives for humanity. He recalled that 6 years ago, the city had experienced a much worse invasion in which they had lost a lot of good people. The reporter then added that Inui survived and became one of the greatest people on the planet. With a smile on his face, the protagonist greeted his fans and left. All the way to school, the protagonist watched excerpts from this interview. From what he heard, his mood got even worse. Suddenly, a hand reached behind him. The next second, a local thug named Tamba grabbed him with his heavy arm. His accomplice kicked Hiroya in the stomach with all his might. The bully explained to the brat that he had no right to behave so familiarly in front of Tamba, all because he had been jealous. Selected as a candidate for the next generation numbers and tagged as a promise. The leader suddenly stopped his partners and told them that they should not behave so rudely with a weakling and a classmate at the same time. Hiroya remembered that his classmate had become the record holder. The youngest of Beisuke murdered. For the protagonist, his level was unattainable. Tamba told the boy that she wanted to go bowling with her friends. He replied with fear that he could not miss school today. The thugs laughed and shouted that there had been a misunderstanding. With an angry look at the victim, Tamba asked Hiroya if he could lend her some money for this entertainment. The boy reminded him in shame that they never returned the money he lent them. Also, Tamba's parents are very famous and rich. He laughed and said that in his innocence, he didn't understand the point of what was happening. Coming through. Suddenly, the burly man shouted that betting with the weakling's money is the most interesting thing to do, and then hit the protagonist. From the fallen wallet, the bully was only able to get a small amount of money. Throwing the wallet aside, the bully with a smile mocked. He pointed out that the boy should have made that pitiful face from the very beginning. The impact of Tamba's punch caused blood to appear on Hiroya's face. One of the thugs commented that the members of the numbers were paid a lot of money. The ringleader added that the best heroes have as much power as presidents. The words of these scoundrels that numbers should have everything, women, money, and a beautiful life, deeply hurt the protagonist. Looking up, she whispered that it wasn't true. Looking at the bullies, Hiroya shouted that they were not wrong. Enraged, he pounced on the ringleader and shouted that numbers were not as vulgar as thugs like them, adding that he would never become a number. The enraged Tamba ordered the brat to repeat his words. After a brief silence, he told his accomplices that the bowling was cancelled for today. Determined to teach the weakling a lesson, they dragged him to an even more deserted place. Tamba hit Hiroya one blow after another, hitting the victim with impunity. The bully said that this lesson would teach the brat to shut up when necessary. When the bully got bored of the beating, he offered to remind the weakling of his level. Reo Hitamba was one of the strongest heroes that had ever existed, with an incredible level 2500 for his age. He reminded the beaten boy that he could easily break it in half if he wanted to. In addition, the bully has one of the most effective and interesting skills, Pocket. With this ability, Tamba can appropriate anything, and use it by putting it in and taking it out. With a mocking smile, he offered the weakling the opportunity to experience the effects of this skill on himself. The huge creature pounced on Hiroya, who immediately rushed to flee. Tamba yelled at the victim that he should run faster if he didn't want to be eaten. Hiroya accidentally tripped over the hole and fell, hitting his face on the concrete with all his might. The entity immediately grabbed the boy's leg tightly and lifted him high on the ground. He then slammed the victim sharply to the ground, raising a huge cloud of dust. When the dust cleared, the protagonist looked at the place of the bite and could not believe his eyes. Then his body was pierced by a sharp pain, and he screamed violently. The hooligans couldn't figure out what they had to do with this one brat. Tamba offered to save the protagonist if he said that he was simply attacked by a small monster. When Hiroya didn't respond, she laughed and said that the boy would be tied up with a leash for the rest of his life. The boy could not say a word because of the resentment and pain he felt. Suddenly, Tamba stepped on a notebook. Looking down, he read the title, which made him laugh incredibly. Picking up the diary and opening it, the bully began to read the main character's notes on how to become a number. Then he laughed and said that, despite all these methods, the boy's level had not yet increased. Bending over the victim, Tamba picked him up by the shirt and said that pathetic people like him could never become even the shadow of a hero. The desperate boy could not understand why he had to suffer so much, having lost all hope that his life could change. He decided it was better to die here and now. As he closed his eyes, Hiroya suddenly saw a bright flame in front of him. The non-human silhouette emitting those flames said that this brat was even more pathetic than expected. After imagining her abusers again, she couldn't make out whose voice it was. When Hiroya saw that the world had stopped, he was surprised that he could still hear someone, since he was supposed to be dead. The strange voice suddenly added that people die for rather trivial things. Hiroya asked the creature what it was. The silhouette replied that his name was Mugen. The entity was surprised that the boy had forgotten what happened 6 years ago, since that was when they met. Hiroya remembered that it was this particular Basabai that had defeated Seika Inoue, but the monster suddenly replied that he had never been defeated, and that he had spent all those 6 years in the boy's body. A surprised Hiroya asked how it was possible. Mugen replied that after exhausting his powers, he tried to steal the body of a man who was nearby at the time. Coincidentally, the only suitable person in the surroundings was 11-year-old Hiroya. But something went wrong during the absorption attempt. He himself was absorbed by a weakling. All these years, the monster was disgusted to see his human shell degenerate. But despite 6 years of humiliation, Mugen was grateful to the human for saving his life. Finishing explaining the essence of what was happening, the creature approached the boy and told him that he would die soon. Hiroya seemed to have already accepted his fate. Suddenly, the monster asked the boy why he thought his life had been discarded as used garbage. Without an answer, he said that it was all due to the weakness of the protagonist. Continuing to pressure Hiroya, Mugen suggested that the boy was ready to kill those guys at that very place. The demon then suggested that the protagonist should try that power for the first and last time in his life. Unexpectedly, he said that this was not the ending he wanted at all, and the power he had desired all his life. He would like to channel it for the benefit of others. Hiroya did not want power for revenge, but wanted to be able to help for the sake of all humanity. However, the boy could no longer affect the fusion process. The thugs were still standing over the protagonist's body when suddenly an incredible amount of energy gushed out of him. For all three of them, what happened was a complete surprise. The pools of blood left behind after the incident also suddenly rose into the air. The next instant, the brat who had been dead until recently was standing in front of the bullies. Mugen opened the level panel in front of him and asked if the guy really didn't understand why his level wasn't going up. After that, he immediately broke the panel, laughing furiously to the entire room. The demon then claimed that, in fact, Hiroya's level was rising in the opposite direction. The fragments of the level panel showed the number of infinity. Gaining full control of the body, the monster was finally able to examine it. The bullies who couldn't figure out what they were up against couldn't believe that this weakling was still alive. Examining his hands, Mugen came to the conclusion that, as expected, the human body was very weak. Pressing his middle finger a little harder than normal, he broke it easily. While the accomplices were laughing, not realizing what was happening, the ringleader was carefully watching the strange actions of the weakling, who should be dead by now. Finally angry, the monster whispered to the little bastards that they had better try not to die too quickly. Meanwhile, in the city, life went on as usual. Hino was greeted at the office by the receptionist, who confirmed that there were no casualties in the defense of the city, and that the work was done perfectly as always. The hero said that he was lucky that the scene was close, and that he should not relax in any case. Seeing that Inoue was thinking about something, the girl asked what was wrong. The hero replied that he met the boy he saved during the incident 6 years ago. Suddenly, he said, disappointed that I had done something wrong, and that I should have mentioned it earlier. A moment later, the hero felt extreme pressure. An aura of such incredible power scared him to death. He got up abruptly from his chair and began to go over all the possible variants of what had happened. To his great regret, Inoue came to the conclusion that a calamity-class monster had awakened somewhere. At the same time, upon hearing the offensive nickname, one of the thugs pounced on Hiroya. Activating his ability on the fly, he shouted that he didn't want to hear such nonsense from such a brat. The next instant, he threw a powerful punch that suddenly missed its target. At the same moment, the bully's body was covered with dozens of small cuts all over. Unable to stand for a second, the thug's breathless body fell to the ground. Mugen squealed with pleasure, saying that he had missed the sound of bones breaking for 6 whole years. Seeing what had happened, Tamba became extremely nervous. This monster no longer looked like the brat they had been beating up. To the leader's surprise, his second accomplice was not impressed. Putting himself in combat position, he activated his ability. Shouting insults in the direction of his opponent, he attacked him. From the bully's hands came barbs towards the protagonist that wrapped around his body. But he was hardly glad that he grabbed his opponent. His ability was suddenly disabled. It happened so quickly that the bully did not even have time to react to the hand that came to his forehead. The next instant, a powerful snap shattered his head and threw him away. Having finished with the second accomplice, the demon shouted with delight that this was too boring. Wanting to experience a slightly more tense situation, he felt that the third bully was ready to enter combat. Turning around, Mugen saw his opponent preparing his skill. A sparse smoke from the raised dust began to cover the building. The enraged Tamba shouted that the brat had to stop getting carried away, or he would forget his real place. Dozens of blades rushed towards Mugen in the same second. However, the man simply moved his hand, and all the blades instantly shattered, instantly covering the distance to his opponent. Counterattacking. Immediately, with a devastating power stroke, Tamba flew into the wall with such force that it cracked. Mugen lazily said that the little bipeds should just sleep. The violent crash outside the window was exactly what the demon had expected. From there, 2 huge eyes were returning to him. The look. The next instant, the monster burst into the room, smashing the wall. Turning to his new opponent, Mugen smiled, wondering if he had come to celebrate his return. However, it was unlikely that such a creature had such a mind, probably attracted by the force. Fluctuating force. Coming to after the shocking blow, Tamba watched with horror what was happening. Hardly had his classmate awakened to his power, when a new problem immediately presented itself to him in the form of a dangerous passerby. The appearance of a new stronger opponent only excited Mugen more. A monster like this was perfect for practicing after waking up, but as soon as he had thought about it, immediately, the demonic powers lost their control. Suddenly, control over her body returned to Hiroya. The boy couldn't believe he was still alive. In the same second, Mugen tried to regain control of the human body. I was very surprised that the boy's mind was still intact. However, the demon's ability to control the body was much greater. Mugen suggested the brat to enjoy what was happening and not interfere. The protagonist asked the demon what he was up to. With a mocking smile, the monster replied that he would do what was predetermined 6 years ago. Images of the destroyed city passed before his eyes. He realized that if he did not intervene, the situation of 6 years ago would be repeated, but with much more serious consequences. Feeling his superiority in controlling his body, the demon said that he would first kill the Basabe, and then give a show for all mankind. But suddenly, his arm stopped obeying him. She felt like something was trying to take control of her body. Hiroya gathered his last strength to regain control of his own body. Such a powerful resistance was a complete surprise to Mugen. Having lived in the boy's body for 6 years, I had assumed that it would be quite easy. However, Hiroya had once again trapped the demonic spirit inside the body. When he woke up, the boy looked at his body with surprise. He still couldn't believe that he had managed to subdue such a powerful demon, but now he had a much bigger problem right in front of him. In the form of another physically real monster, Mugen nervously shouted that the boy had to do something or he would die. The monster offered Hiroya to voluntarily give up control of his body during this fight. At the same moment, the monster in front went on the attack. The boy dodged the first blow of the huge tentacles with amazing agility. For himself, it was a big surprise. He felt the influence of Mugen making him move much faster and more agile. The demon realized that the boy was somehow using some of his power. After a few more hits, Hiroya decided to counterattack and threw a punch at the basabai. Then he thought that he could handle even such a powerful monster, but suddenly, one of the tentacles grabbed the boy's leg. The grip was too strong, and it was impossible to do anything. With a great impulse, the monster crashed the boy's body to the ground. He based and then lifted the victim's body to check for signs of life. He was still conscious, but the blow was too strong to continue the fight. Realizing that both of them could die, Mugen helped the half-dead Hiroya activate a special ability. The ability called Infinite Awakening granted an immense power without equal. After using this skill, the enemy's body began to glow from within. Soon after, there was a colossal explosion that shattered the monster. The building in which all the events described above took place was almost completely destroyed. When the smoke cleared, Hiroya saw the results of his skill. Not far from him lay Tamba, barely alive. The guy still couldn't believe that he had somehow managed to destroy an entire building. While the protagonist was recovering, Mugen was analyzing the situation. I still couldn't explain how a child had managed to take control of his body. The setting sun illuminated the ruins of the building. That was how he remembered the day Mugen had met him. At the time, I had no idea what that fateful encounter would entail. The news had instantly spread through the city's channels that a new monster attack had caused the destruction of an entire building. The Metropolis Operations Headquarters and the police, as well as the numbers, were called in to investigate. Hiroya was watching the news with horror, as this incident had happened not far from her home. At this moment, a very strange déjà vu came over him. It seemed as if he was in that place himself, and this explosion had happened because of him, but the boy could not believe that he had managed to destroy an entire house. Since yesterday, it felt a little strange. He still had level 8, but the sensations in his body were very different from normal. Looking at herself in the mirror, she suddenly discovered some red strands in her hair. A sudden feeling of pain caused him to examine his left leg, and he saw a huge scar. As soon as Hiroya realized that it was not a dream, when immediately Mugen addressed him. At the very second when his consciousness was in a kind of space, a sudden sinister voice ordered the boy to bow his head to the big Mugen. However, the demon himself said that the man would not be able to interfere in his plans. Without thinking about it, the guy asked what exactly Mugen wanted to achieve by staying in his body. The monster replied that he saw no point in answering human questions. Instead of answering, he tried to get into the boy's subconscious. In it, he saw the memories of his arrival 6 years ago. The protagonist fell to his knees, unable to relive those memories again. He realized that the creature was trying to get inside his head, and everything reeked of chaos and destruction. Still, Hiroya wasn't going to play along with the monster and do what he wanted. He told the demon that he could not get rid of him so easily. The monster replied that the boy was right, and Mugen did not understand why his body had been absorbed by someone like him. But the demon perfectly understood that if the boy dies, the body will be for him. After these words, the protagonist became convinced that he definitely could not entrust his life to this creature. Mugen smiled and added that he supposed it wouldn't take long. When the boy asked why the demon thought that, he suggested to the brat to think about why that huge creature had come to them yesterday. Hiroya remained silent, and the demon replied that the basabe would instinctively go wherever the screams of agony came from. The boy thought that if that was true, then things would get much more complicated. In that case, the monsters would always be eager to find him. Mugen said that those creatures were not a problem for him, but that Hiroya himself would not be able to handle them and would die quickly. The demon said he would look forward to taking possession of the boy's body. After the conversation, the protagonist headed towards the subway. He realized that he was in a desperate situation because, with level 8, it does not represent any difficulty, even for the weakest monster. In addition, he cannot use the power of demons to survive. Given the uniqueness of the situation, this was not a problem that he should solve alone. To trap a power of such magnitude within him was a problem for the entire human race. He needed someone to help him solve the situation. The only one that immediately came to mind was Seika Inoue. Hiroya was afraid, but he believed that if he told the truth, he would be able to get help. When he got off at one of the stations, he headed for the nearest exit. Suddenly, a tall guy in the crowd called out to him. Two thugs approached the protagonist and began to ask what a useless person like Hiroya was doing in a place like this. The guy tried to insist that he was in a hurry and needed to leave, but the bullies took his words as another insolence. The bully in the black t-shirt said it was time to teach Tamba's puppy a lesson. Before the protagonist had time to notice, he immediately received a powerful punch to the face. To the boy's great surprise, he felt absolutely no pain from the blow, but the bully immediately grabbed his arm and began screaming that it hurt a lot. Seeing that his friend's hand was bloody, the second thug attacked Hiroya. The frightened boy put his hands in front of him, and suddenly he pushed his assailant with all his might. The push was so powerful that the thug flew off the platform and fell directly onto the tracks. Surprised by his new strength, Hiroya asked the bully if he was hurt. Before he could finish his question, a huge monster suddenly came out from the tunnel. The thug who was lying on the tracks only had time to think that he was dead. At that moment, the protagonist realized that the demon was not lying, and that the monsters were really coming for him. He deftly jumped to the side while managing to grab his assailant. Both boys fell to the platform, saving themselves from the monster that flew by. Hiroya noticed once again that such movements are made at the level of reflexes. When he looked at himself in his reflection, he realized that it was probably not his doing. The huge monster, meanwhile, was hovering over its victims. The boy looked at the creature with horror, not knowing if he could give it an equal fight. At one point, he was distracted by the hoarse scream of a woman from the other side of the platform. It seemed that several other similar creatures had already managed to get on the platform and attack the humans. Suddenly, Mugen's voice from inside said that these creatures had come for him. The Basabes attacked one person after another, leaving them no chance. Hiroya was perplexed, remembering his level, and didn't know what to do. If he wanted to save people, he would have to make up his mind and use the power of the Basabe. The table with his stats started to crack and emit a red glow once again. At this point, the boy decided that it didn't matter if the power was granted by the heavens or by monsters. As long as its use helped to save people, the protagonist managed to once again activate the Infinite Awakening ability. Having regained that same power, the boy accepted that it was his power. With a raging fury, he attacked the first creature he saw. The monster that had almost eaten one of the girls on the platform was eliminated from the fight with a single precise blow. Realizing that he would not be able to survive in an uneven fight without Mugen's help, he decided that he would simply steal her power. With great speed, Hiroya swept the entire station, killing every monster in his way. People didn't even have time to realize what had happened. Many of them were already on the verge of death. The boy had already stopped, and the mangled bodies of the monsters kept falling. Mugen was surprised that the boy had once again dared to use his power. Having finished the fight in a matter of seconds, Hiroya stopped and looked at his hands in horror. Such a colossal power that I had never even dreamed of. When he came to, he heard the voice of the girl he had saved in the first place. She thanked him for saving her life. Then, one by one, people ran to their savior and asked him if he was a rank. The thugs who had miraculously saved themselves in the butcher's shop looked at the boy with surprise. That was how Hiroya saved many human lives with his own hands for the first time. Knowing that from now on, he would always be useful to society, the boy headed for the exit. Now he won't let the devil do what he wants. At the same time, one of the patients at the city hospital was much more irritable than usual. The same name kept coming from his room. It was Tamba, the boy who miraculously survived the collapse of that building. He repeated the name of the protagonist endlessly, swearing that he would never forgive him. Suddenly, a nurse came into her room and said she had a visitor. The guy angrily replied that he had already said that he wanted to be alone in the near future. However, the unexpected visitor replied that you should speak more kindly to the nurses who take care of you. That visitor was Seika Inoue. The young man was surprised to see one of the members of the numbers. The hero asked Tamba if his wounds were healing well, as it was rare for someone to survive battles with Basabe of this level. The guy noticed that there was also a girl standing next to the hero who was also from the top 10. So the situation was much more serious than he had realized. Hinobo explained that the numbers were currently investigating the case against the unknown person who was able to kill that monster. At this moment, the injured bully remembered how the person he was humiliating had easily defeated such a strong monster. I was terribly angry with that brat, and I didn't know what to do. Deciding that the numbers didn't know anything about the incident anyway, Tamba pointed at himself and said that he personally had killed that Basabai. Then he added out loud that he thought I deserved to be part of the top 10. The bully couldn't believe that he had been saved by a pathetic little brat who had obtained his powers from nothing. Hinobe carefully studied the behavior and emotions of the interviewee and drew certain conclusions. His obviously unstable emotional state said a lot about his prospects. Smiling, Hinobe said that the young man needed to heal himself. Eridas first. Deciding that this was not an indirect refusal to accept him into the team, Tamba asked the heroes not to leave and to listen to him. The couple walked away from the room, after which the girl said that this guy was a complete mistake in the hero training system, and that she would break him in one fell swoop. His interlocutor chuckled and said that, in fact, this young man was identified as a promise. The girl said with disdain that, in that case, the days of this world were numbered. And No also commented that another boy had survived the incident. The girl asked who came to get him. The hero replied that the fast-rowing number 13 had come for him. The companion asked if this was normal, to which she received the answer that if the enemy has a high rank, one should be prepared for it. The hero chosen to search for the surviving child was heading towards the high tower. That man's name was Kusanagi-K. The area around this tall building was very crowded. This was also the place where the protagonist arrived. This was the headquarters of the Ranks Association. Any information about the Basabai could be found here. At different times, all the ranks from Japan came here, and also here was the base of the top 10 ranks in the world. Nicknamed the numbers. This was where Hiroya planned to find Inoue. The boy might be able to deal with the monsters on his own, but he couldn't defeat the demon inside him. Also, in case Mugen could take control of the body, there needs to be someone who can kill him. And such a person, according to the protagonist, could only be Seika and Nove. After sorting out his thoughts, the boy headed towards the main entrance. In the main hall, he was greeted by the pleasant-looking counselors. A surprised Hiroya guessed that it was probably one of the skills of the local employees, and that only one body was real. One of the counselors asked the boy how she could help him. He replied that he would like to meet with Mr. Inoue. The girl replied that the hero was not present at that time, and asked if the meeting was scheduled, to which Hiroya replied negatively. Then the consultant decided to clarify the boy's data, and he gave her his age and his name. After searching the name in the database, the girl was surprised that the young man had not yet registered his special ability. He reminded her that this procedure was mandatory for all awakened ones, and the evasion of this registration was a serious crime. In an attempt to smooth things over, the protagonist said that he had just recently woken up, and that his abilities had not manifested for quite some time. The counselor said it was not a problem, and asked the boy to register his skill, and asked if he wanted to register as a rank. The girl asked the guy to put his hand on the scanner, and also said that he was about to talk about everything related to the ranks. Meanwhile, Mugen was looking thoughtfully at what was happening around him. The whole thing bored him. Just when the monster was thinking that everyone who was here was not worth a grain of rice, an interesting person appeared from behind. The protagonist, who was busy registering his skill, did not immediately notice such a strong aura. The counselor, meanwhile, was telling her that registering as a rank allows a person to get their own rank, which increases by killing a Basabe. He also reminded her that the top 10 ranks are placed in the numbers team, whose members have the opportunity to receive the best rewards and honors. The girl kept talking about the benefits of the ranks, but Hiroya wasn't listening to her so intently anymore. He had originally come here to deal with the demon inside of him, but now he had the opportunity to become what he had always wanted to be. It remained to be seen whether it was possible to do so with such a powerful entity dwelling inside you. The problem was also that working as rank could expose Mugen. After passing the background check, the registration was successfully completed, and Hiroya officially became a rank. The dashboard with your personal stats should have been updated, including the appearance of the skill names. However, despite officially registering as rank, the name of the skill never appeared. It was the first time the girl had encountered such a situation, but she suggested that it might have been a server error. In turn, the protagonist was indescribably happy that there was only one script. Otherwise, he might have exposed the monster inside of him. The counselor said that due to the uniqueness of the error, additional confirmation was required. Hiroya barely had time to get nervous. However, suddenly, someone called him from behind. An unknown voice called him by name, which was even stranger in this situation. The person behind him had used his skill in the middle of a crowded place without warning. With a powerful explosion of his aura, he pushed aside the people around him. The protagonist prepared to repel the attacks, but realized that the forces were too unequal. He didn't understand what was going on, and that put double pressure on him. The man in front stood silently looking at the boy. Suddenly, he asked if Hiroya might be the one. The people who crowded around him quickly recognized this man as Kusanagi K, one of the most famous ranks. He was one of the 20 strongest fighters against the Basabai, and many called him a complete lunatic. Realizing that a fight between ranks was about to break out against the rules, people began to disperse hurriedly. Hiroya asked his opponent what he was up to, and reminded him that it was dangerous to do such things in public. Kei just smiled smugly, and said that he had heard that the boy was stronger than him. Those words left the protagonist dumbfounded. I didn't understand who could say something like that about him. A few hours earlier, Kei, sitting in a bar, angrily asked his interlocutor why he had called him. When he got no answer, he asked again if he had finally decided to have a fair fight. Hinobe replied that it was not about their personal relationship, that she was about to leave, when her colleague offered her a glass of milk on her own. Without thinking much, the rank said he would leave after drinking. Getting to the point, Hinobe said that she needed to meet a guy who had survived an encounter with a very strong base. When Kei asked him what was so special about this kid, Inoue said that he felt a power fluctuation the moment the creature appeared, which meant that if this particular brat had defeated that Basabai, it could be even stronger than Kei. Inoue wanted to find out everything about that brat, so he sent one of his best for this task. When his colleague asked if they could fight, Hinobe replied that he could act according to the situation. Finishing his glass of milk, Kei reminded his interlocutor that he was still eager to fight with him. Hino smiled and said that when the time came, he would be ready to accept the challenge. And now he was facing the brat East who, according to his colleague, had defeated the mighty Basabai. Kei saw the extremely modest performance of his opponent and commented that that could not be true. At this point, Hiroya felt a tension. It's as if they were reading it like an open book. None of the thugs who had cornered him in the alley would even come close to this man's aura level. Realizing that talking would get him nowhere, Kei decided to take action. He used one of his abilities against the protagonist, who successfully dodged it. The boy angrily demanded that everything stop and declared that he had no intentions of fighting with anyone. Kei reacted without emotion and said that, in that case, Hiroya would have to try to stop him. Dodging more and more attacks, The protagonist did not know what he should do. He realized that if he received any damage, the demon's powers might suddenly awaken. So it seemed like he didn't want to stop under any circumstances. By inflicting increasingly powerful attacks, he forced the protagonist to move faster and faster. Kelly was eager for the boy to unleash his true power. Being in his body without the help of Mugen, the protagonist found it increasingly difficult to repel the attacks. Suddenly, Hiroya felt someone behind him. It was a child who had inexplicably ended up in the lobby. Hiroya stepped between the boy and Kei, and blocked his ability without difficulty. The light of the blocked blow spread for several blocks around the building. The smoke cleared, and Kei was in the same posture he had originally. In front of him, covering the child with her body, was Hiroya. As the number 13 had originally supposed, this young man's rank was clearly above the 8th. Outraged that his opponent was attacking a defenseless child, Hiroya demanded that he stop this antics, and tell him that he wanted to. The enraged protagonist reminded him that this power was to fight monsters. To the cries that this power was meant to protect humans, Kei suddenly replied that he didn't care about that. There was a brief silence as number 3 explained that he was only interested in the process of the battle itself, and didn't care if he was fighting humans or monsters. All he had wanted for all these long years was to test his own strength. Being more than furious, the protagonist once again ordered his opponent to stop fooling around. He shouted with hatred that Kei was arrogant for possessing so much power, and that he was therefore no different from a basabai. Number 13 smiled slightly, and said that, in such a case, there was only one way out, as he created a powerful spell in front of him. He said the only way to end this was by defeating him. Immediately after saying that, he made a lightning-fast maneuver towards his opponent, and ended up right next to his face. Before the boy knew it, his enemy's fist was pounced on his head. By some miracle, he managed to dodge the blow. The next moment, Kei was already much further away from the protagonist. The boy assumed that his opponent had the ability to teleport. Hiroya noticed that before approaching, Kei adopts the same pose. Perhaps then I can try to anticipate the moment when the opponent will try to attack. And, in fact, the next instant, Kei practically grabbed the protagonist by the face. Hiroya barely dodged before receiving an immediate kick to the face. A deafening shockwave erupted inside the lobby. Watching how the fight was going, Mugen smiled at the fact that the guy had practically no chance. Laughing, he said it was about time the boy died, and handed over his body to him. But Hiroya, no matter what happened, he didn't want to give up. He was still trying to match his opponent's speed, but it was almost impossible. His abilities were on a completely different level. Another missed punch to the face sent the protagonist flying through the air. The next second, Kei tried to finish off his opponent with a powerful right hand. However, this time, Hiroya managed to avoid defeat and managed to dodge him. Since the battle began, the protagonist had not been able to read his opponent's movements. Throwing herself at him again and again, she could only vaguely speculate about what was in store for her. The constant teleportations and energy blasts did not give a definitive understanding of the tactics Kusanagi was fighting with. The only thing Hiroya realized was that when his opponent's fist closed, he felt fear. Every attack of the protagonist was not a problem for him. Striking the boy once more, Kei only dryly remarked that all his movements were boring. After these words, the protagonist was finally overcome in this battle. His opponent's fist was pounding him non-stop. His speed was colossally incomprehensible to him. It was impossible to defeat Kei due to exhaustion or in hand-to-hand combat. Looking at another selfish Kaki, ready to finally kill him, the guy wondered if he was really that pathetic. At that moment, he remembered that not so long ago, he did not have any power. With these thoughts, he tried to continue the struggle. However, the punch that Hiroya put all his remaining strength into, his opponent blocked it with one hand without any problem. Calmly looking into his opponent's eyes, Kei said that the brat was still at the 0 level. The free hand of the number 13 created another mass of energy. With a glance, the protagonist finally realized that he had lost. The final blow was delivered directly to Hiroya's exposed torso. The most intense glow of that blow once again illuminated the nearby neighborhoods. Without even looking at the devastation caused by his hit, K turned around and said that Inoue had cheated on him again. Number 13 was about to leave, but the next instant he perceived an aura of incredible power. That power came from the man he had just knocked out. Turning around, Ki looked in the direction where the voice was coming from with a scared look. The terrifying thing that had taken over Hiroya's body was mocking the fact that the boy had lost control of his body and handed it over to her once more. They looked at each other again. Only now, Kay didn't feel the same advantage. Now I was going to have to fight something more powerful. Number 13 had never heard anything like this from anyone before. In front of him was the exact same man he had just knocked out, but now his aura was hundreds of times stronger than that of any creature Kay had seen in years. The ranker barely had time to think about the fact that it was as if he was facing a completely different creature. But the monster immediately attacked him. Unexpectedly for Ki himself, his reactions were not enough to repel this blow with lightning speed. All 3 claw strikes hit the target accurately. Blood gushed from the wounds of number 13. The great power of this creature was difficult to assimilate. The creature muttered that he would be interested in ripping off the hunter's head, but the hunter was already on the verge of death. Suddenly, Kay's face lit up with happiness. Finally, he had found a worthy opponent. At the same second, he made a powerful lunge in an attempt to hit his opponent, but the latter easily dodged him. Mugen said with a mocking smile that he had recognized Kay's skill a long time ago. As he dodged more and more attacks from the number 13, he suggested that his skill was called compression. Continuing with his attacks, Kay said that his opponent had guessed and that his skill was indeed called compression. That's when he prepared his attack and said that there would be no impact, but that it would simply hurt. The monster seemed to have no intention of dodging the attacks. It tried its strongest attack. However, the creature did not even flinch. Completely ignoring the effects of the attack, Mugen pointed out that the skill was quite interesting. Then, in an instant, he performed his lightning attack, adding that they, the Basabai, do not have similar abilities. The fact that the man called himself a monster completely confused Ki, and he couldn't stop the blow. The number 13 was slammed to the ground with full force after a single blow. The monster laughed viciously and muttered that man was nothing in the face of absolute power. However, the guy was not going to give up and prepared a new spell. Turning sharply towards his opponent, he created an antimatter sphere in the area of his left hand. Mugen's hand was completely vaporized. However, he didn't seem to care much about it. After whispering that he was just a fragile mouse body, he began to grow a new arm, as if nothing had happened. A couple of seconds later, the limb was restored in a much more sinister form. The number 13 had never seen anything like it in his entire career. I couldn't even imagine that a human being had the ability to regenerate amputated limbs. Most likely, it was not a human being, but something else. Unable to follow his opponent's actions, Ki let himself be grabbed by the shirt. As if it were something weightless, the monster spun his opponent, and then threw him with all his might against the wall of the building. Lying in the middle of the rubble, Ki couldn't understand how someone could be so strong. Then, gathering his last strength, he decided to use his decisive trump card. It was a skill called Absolute Domination Shrine. Such a scenario further excited the demon, and he rushed into battle with renewed vigor. To outside observers, it seemed that an entire city could be destroyed during the battle of these two. The rivals pounced on each other with renewed vigor. Many of the people watching the battle demanded that they stop, and just as the battle was about to enter a new phase, someone from the crowd suddenly rushed towards the fighters. The girl at the reception saw this person and couldn't believe her eyes. The opponents had already almost faced each other in another round of battle. The next moment, there was a huge explosion that shook the walls of neighboring buildings. However, when the smoke cleared, everyone saw Seika and No standing between the opponents. Moments before the collision, he managed to block the punches of both fighters. Mugen and Kei stopped and looked in the direction where Inoue had come from. There were the strongest members of the numbers team there. But even though one of the numbers had intervened in the fight, Kei still couldn't calm down and was eager to keep fighting. Suddenly, the same girl appeared next to his head and said that the battle was over. Hino also supported her, saying it was time to stop breaking the rules and ruining people's lives. Suddenly, Mugen drew attention to himself. Saying that it had been a long time since they had seen each other, he reminded them that the battle was not over yet. While preparing for battle, the monster suggested, as he had done 6 years ago, that he would blow up the entire city into small fragments. But suddenly, his control over his body suddenly weakened sharply. At that moment, the protagonist's subconscious regained control of his body, and the aggression decreased. Retreating once more into the bowels of his subconscious, Mugen said that this body was simply disgusting. When he woke up, the first thing the protagonist did was to be glad that he was able to defeat this monster again. He almost fell to the ground without strength, but was held up in time by Inoue. The hero examined the boy's body. His features seemed familiar to her. A recent incident surfaced in her memories, when a tearful man had asked her to take him with the 10. Taking the child in his arms, he walked away from the recent battlefield. Just at that moment, Ki called him and told him that he was his prey. And No ordered number 13 to step aside in a harsh tone, explaining that his team would take over the treatment of this child. In response to his interlocutor's indignant look, Inoue reminded him that he just wanted to know if this guy was his ally or not. The number only reminded him that Kelly had just broken the law, to which the latter replied that he did not care. Inoue responded to another rudeness by reminding him that it's about time he picks a side to fight for. Hiroya came to his senses sitting on a chair in a dark room. Immediately, he realized that he could not move as his hands were tied, and his neck was fastened to the chair. A voice behind him suddenly asked him how he had slept. Recognizing his idol standing behind him, the guy got excited and introduced himself. Instead of returning the greeting, Inoue suddenly began listing the accusations attributed to the protagonist. The other members of the 10 were also at his side, who simply remained silent. The sudden verdict for the rape sounded like thunder. The numbers sentenced Koigami Hiroya to death. Suddenly, the guy felt a burst of Laura from someone behind him. He realized that this did not seem like a joke, and that no one was going to listen to him. At the same instant, a huge skeleton figure with an equally huge scythe appeared behind his back, and No muttered that the sentence would be executed here and now. After looking at the skeleton, the boy realized that he was controlled by that man with the cape and glasses. From among the 10 strongest ranks, the protagonist asked not to be killed, but it is Suran who only coldly replied that he was doing what he was told. Hiroya watched in horror as death was imminently approaching. He seemed to be the only one who understood what would happen if he was killed. Knowing that the demon inside her would take over her body as soon as she died, Hiroya asked Inoue to give her a chance to speak. However, it seemed that he had already made his final decision and was not going to change it. Seconds before the execution of the sentence, the protagonist managed to say that there was an essence inside him. But as soon as he finished speaking, the skeleton with the scythe dealt a quick blow. A while passed and the boy opened his eyes. Then he realized that the skeleton had only cut the chain connecting his neck to the back of the chair. Moreover, his hands were also untied, and he himself was completely unharmed. At this moment, Inoue coldly said that it was just as he thought. He apologized to the young man and said that he just wanted to hear the whole truth from his mouth. The number pointed to the protagonist and said that all the destructive actions performed by that child were actually by the Beisuke that lived inside him. Inoue then looked at the camera and asked if they really still wanted to carry out the death sentence. After a brief silence, the voice replied that the government trusted the numbers to do it, but if they made a mistake, Inoue would be personally punished as a leader. The hero completely agreed and promised that there would be no failure. The government representative also reminded that they are allocating huge budgets to fight the Beisuke, and the hero's task is to clean up this monster world as soon as possible. Hino bowed respectfully and said her team is working on it. When the meeting was over, one of the 10 said he needed to leave urgently. It was the second of the numbers, Makio Kurusu. He said he was currently busy with some minor matters. In addition, the most attractive representative of the numbers was in the room, the number 10, named Memamai Chernobyl. Immediately, 3 legendary numbers came to decide his fate. Before leaving, Kurusu suddenly said that he thought the boy should be executed anyway, as he believed that all risk factors should be eliminated. The protagonist was surprised and asked his savior why he did not let him be executed, why he believed that there really was a demon living inside him. And Noah replied with a smile that he simply had a very good sense of smell and could sense that the boy smelled strongly of baswai. In addition, it could be noticed by the sudden personality change and extremely aggressive behavior. In addition, the day before, the boy did not smell of Beisuke. Adding also the fact that Hiroyo was present during the explosion of the house in Shibuya. And Novo assumed that the demon was somehow interacting with the boy. Either way, this situation was unprecedented. So Inoue asked the protagonist to tell him everything in detail. Looking at his idol, the guy felt extremely positive emotions. Despite everything that had happened, I was glad to have reached him. Hiroya began his story by explaining that there was a Beisuke living inside him. Because of him, the other monsters are trying to attack the boy. Besides, he had already been attacked on the subway today. It turned out that Inoue had already heard about this incident. At this point, Hiroya seriously wondered if he should keep telling her. After sorting out his thoughts, he decided to tell everything from beginning to end, but at that moment, their conversation was interrupted by a deafening roar behind Inoue. Behind him was a man in a pink jacket, and in front of him lay the corpse of one of the basabai. The blonde man smiled as he greeted Inoue and asked him since when his city had become a gathering place for monsters. Annoyed, he pointed out that he had killed at least 3 similar basabai on his way here. Not bothering to listen to the arguments of his acquaintance, the blonde immediately noticed that he kept feeling the presence of monsters in this room. He looked angrily at the protagonist, realizing that the smell was coming from him. The next instant, he dealt a devastating blow to Hiroya's stomach. The boy, who was unprepared for this turn of events, almost died, and No ran scared to the boy, while his acquaintance kept walking to the side. The leader of the numbers shouted at his partner angrily, calling him by the name of Teo. The latter, in turn, approached the complaining boy and said that up close he really looked human. The protagonist recognized in that evil look the man named Kazuki Teo, who was number 4. The man in the pink coat asked surprised why they left the infected man alive. Hinobe replied that it was her decision. In response to his colleague's indignation at not listening to the opinions of each of the 10, Hinobe explained that he was not going to wait for each of the 10 to make such decisions. Teo then said that he was already here, and that his opinion would have to be heard. Without thinking twice, Teo activated the death sentence skill. The blonde then shouted angrily that this brat was basing and should die right now. The protagonist did not have time to react to this outburst, and immediately an explosion occurred. When he opened his eyes, the boy saw that Inoue had knocked Stem to the ground and said that the decision had already been made. In anger, number 4 brushed off his partner and told him not to belittle him. He contemptuously accused Inoue of making decisions on his own without consulting anyone for a long time. Inoue, in turn, reminded his friend that his main goal was to destroy the basabai and restore peaceful order. He pointed to the main character and said that people like him, who were able to pity monsters, are invaluable. In the end, Inoue added that they should be the light that will save all living beings. However, Teo could not be appeased, saying that such a weak and useless person could not be the one to save the world. Suddenly, Hiroya said that he realized that he was not a valuable member of society. But now a strong Beiseigoya has possessed his body, and he does not know what could happen soon. That's why he came here to solve this problem. After that, the guy asked his idol to fulfill a request for him. Hiroya wanted Inoue to kill him in case his body was suddenly possessed by a demon again. Such a bold request from a 17-year-old boy deeply moved the leader of the 10. He patted the boy's head and said that the words he had just uttered made him a truly strong man, and No promised that he would try to deal with the problem and find the best way out of the situation. At this point, Teo walked towards the exit, adding that he did not support this idea and did not trust this child. The position of the number 4 did not change. Only if all the Basegays died, humanity would have a peaceful future. After mentally dismissing his colleague, Inoue turned to Hiroya, telling him that he would have to realize the bitter truth. From that moment on, the boy's life changed to a before and an after. There was no way to go back to his old life. Now I was starting to work side by side with the numbers. At first, Hiroya thought that this was exactly what he had dreamed of. But then he remembered what the attitude of the numbers had been towards him. Hinobe said that the boy was going to have a very hard time, and that it would be difficult for him to get used to it. But in order to brighten up his life in some way, Hinobe thought about changing the boy's image a little. After a while, the protagonist changed into a new uniform. It was the official uniform of the Association of the Number, given to the candidates. Suddenly, Inoue remembered that during their recent encounter, Hiroya had asked him how to become a number. The leader of the numbers explained that he was not in that position because he would have worked hard. Still, he has the best score in terms of basabayas, killed and people saved. Therefore, in order to reach the top 10, Hiroya must prove that he is useful for humanity. After an inspiring speech, Inoue said that he would send assignments through Rhine, and immediately asked Hiroya for permission to add him as a friend, to which he immediately agreed. After that, the shocked boy was taken to his new apartment. Looking at the correspondence with his idol, he thought that today he felt as if he had already lived hundreds of lives. Suddenly, a message came to his phone that a Besabala door had been discovered in one of the neighborhoods. The silence of the city at night was only broken by the alerts instructing civilians to leave the gate discovery area. 17 minutes after the creatures invaded, the protagonist was the first to arrive on the scene. Representatives of the highest classes of monsters can be detected even before the invasion begins. In such cases, the hunter's task was to destroy the creatures from the gate as soon as possible. It was supposed to be easy for two people to accomplish this task, especially when your partner is a number 4. Hiroya was very surprised to learn that his partner tonight would be Teo. Undoubtedly, the character of the number 4 is very difficult, but he was a unique person in his own way. Having left his family in his early college years, he had amassed his fortune. And now Teo is not only one of the strongest people in the world, but also one of the most successful in Japan. Hiroya barely thought about this man with the nickname of the Night King, when immediately the man appeared behind the protagonist's back. Coldly, looking at his companion, Teo warned that for any delay, even for a second next time, he would kill the boy. But suddenly out of nowhere, number 4 burst out, and said he didn't need an excuse to kill the brat anyway. In anger, he called his partner a monster. This turn of events, before Hiroya had even started the cleaning, starts from the door, was certainly not expected. Teo attacked the protagonist with lightning speed, but at the last moment, managed to dodge a powerful blow. However, his blow reached the boy's cheek, from which blood immediately gushed out. Hiroya asked his partner to wait so he could ask him some questions. However, Teo interrupted the brat and said that it was only because Seika and Nogue were supporting him. Hiroya really wanted to understand what was going on between these two and why they hated each other. The Night King turned to his companion, saying that, although the chief of the numbers had left him alive, he did not agree, and would now conduct his own trial. There were still 15 minutes left before the monsters arrived. That was the time the protagonist needed to endure. Hiroya stammered out the name of his idol, but Teo immediately dropped it, and said that here and now only his rules worked and nothing else. Time continued to pass slowly. The Night King then suggested that it shouldn't take long to get started. After sorting out his thoughts, Hiroya put himself in combat position and said that he was ready to be an opponent for STEM. Meanwhile, in the Tower of Numbers, someone was still working. Hino, who was meditating, was also awake. Minimi, who was passing by, greeted him and asked him why he had sent the two of them on a mission together. I was sure that the boy would not come back from the mission alive. Hino explained her decision by saying that she believed Teo was an adult and would not do anything rash. His greatest hope lay in Koigami Hiroya, whose potential, even excluding the effects of the demon's influence, he considered immense. The leader of the numbers believed that there was something special lurking inside this boy. At the same time, A fierce battle between the two comrades was continuing in the factory area. Unlike number 13, number 4 was not as fast. However, he was capable of inflicting tremendous damage, even at a distance, deciding that relatively equal speed could help. Helping him, the protagonist decided to fight back, but suddenly it was as if his body had gone numb. Hiroya looked at his arm and was horrified. In the places of the numerous cuts inflicted by his opponent, areas of infection were visible. Most likely, it was some kind of stem skill, and in fact his skill was causing the cut areas to become infected. And the resulting sharp pain, the colossal level 8100, also increased the effects of the poison, causing the limbs to become numb, and the tissues to die. After a few tens of seconds, Hiroya was almost completely immobilized. He had effectively lost the unequal battle, but suddenly, he reactivated his infinite awakening ability, and the effects of the poisons no longer affected him. It was the perfect time to launch his attack. Stem, still confident in his superiority, pressed the boy's throat, and told him that he could not be the hope of humanity. It was funny to him that the brat couldn't even say his last words, since his throat was already affected by the poison. Leaving the brat to die alone, Stem turned around and walked towards the door. Suddenly, he heard the brat gasp that he would not tolerate insults towards Seika, and no. Number 4 turned around and saw his opponent slowly getting up. His aura changed drastically at that moment. Keeping his balance, Hiroya said that he wouldn't let anyone think that he was so easily defeated. Looking at the boy's tearful face, Teo still couldn't understand why he was still alive. Teo replied that he couldn't treat Inoue well since his true nature is much scarier and darker. Enraged, Hiroya shouted that Inoue was the only one who believed in him, and that he would not tolerate such words about his idol. Number 4 coldly said that this kind of blind faith was very dangerous. Then, he immediately used another skill called Purple Snow. Suddenly, snow of an unusual color really began to fall from the sky. But before the protagonist realized, dead birds began to fall to the ground after the beautiful ones. Snowflakes. The sound of crows falling dead scared the boy. Looking up at the sky again, he realized that the snow was poisonous. In the same second, a sharp pain shot through his body, and blood gushed from his eyes, nose and mouth. He realized that Stem's ability was actually a weapon of mass destruction. Unable to keep his balance any longer, he fell to the ground. Looking thoughtfully at the falling snow, Teo noticed that no living creature could survive this ability. So he was even more interested in knowing how Hiroya had managed to survive. Bleeding. The boy was struggling to stand up. At the same time, his aura was even stronger than after number 4 had used his previous ability. Stem assumed that the opponent had the ability to ignore poisons. I had no other explanation for why the boy was still alive. Most likely, his strength was due to the abilities of the monster inside him. The simple data card of the protagonist kept a mystery. Where the skill should have been shown, there was a script. In a fit of anger, Hiroya shouted that he would never give his body to a Beisuke. Such a turn of events further angered Stallo. This was the first time he had faced a man with poison resistance. The opponents faced each other in a lightning-fast hand-to-hand combat to finally decide the outcome of the showdown. For several minutes, they hit each other with quick punches. However, while they were engrossed in the confrontation, they didn't realize that the time to open the door had expired. A second later, an intense glow illuminated the portal, and it began to collapse. At the same moment, a huge creature burst into the human world, blocking the path of both heroes. Both boys looked at the monster with disdain. The appearance of a Beisuke in the middle of such a heated battle seemed out of place. In a rage, the ranks pounced on the creature and tore it to pieces in the blink of an eye. Then the door finally collapsed with an eerie crash. The rivals paid no attention to the massive explosion that followed. They pounced on each other with renewed vigor to decide the outcome of the confrontation. However, the announcement over the loudspeaker that the Beisuke at the door had been defeated stopped them. A pleasant female voice thanked everyone present for their cooperation and declared the battle zone as a temporarily closed area. Fixing his hair, Teo recognized the boy who faced him in a fair fight. His gaze suddenly changed, and he asked the protagonist if he wanted to go with him. Such an offer came as an extreme surprise to Hiroya, and he replied that although he was pleased, he had faith in Inoue. Stem then turned around and walked away, finally adding that he had warned the boy. The protagonist was left alone, saying goodbye. Stem's words about Inoue had alerted him. At that moment, he never imagined that from this instant on, the number 4 would disappear without a trace. Upon arriving at Inoue's, Hiroya talked about the incident. The leader of the numbers apologized to the protagonist, adding that he did not think that Teo could do such a thing. Inoue took the blame for what happened, as he could not foresee such an outcome. The embarrassed boy shouted into the phone that the leader had nothing to apologize for. Inoue then added that family mistakes are a family responsibility, and apologizes for what happened as an older brother. Such a statement of the idol shocked the protagonist. I had no idea that Inoue and Teo were brothers. The boy exclaimed that among ordinary people, no one knows about it, since even he had not heard about such a thing. And No confirmed Hiroya's speculation by saying that it was not disclosed. Then he asked if Teo had said anything about him. At that moment, the protagonist froze. She perfectly remembered Teo's words about Inoue's dark nature, and Roya realized that she couldn't fully trust all the people in this world, especially those she had personally known for a couple of days. So the guy decided to lie, saying that Teo had not mentioned anything specific. And No said he understood perfectly, and added that they had completed the mission successfully anyway. Then he suggested to the guy to return to the headquarters as soon as possible. The next day, Hiroya went to his school for the first time in a long time. It seemed to him that he had not been here for a long time. Earlier that morning, Inoue had suggested to the boy to go to school. To Hiroya's concerns about being attacked by Basabe during this time, he replied that he had to say goodbye to the school due to his new assignment. He asked his secretary named Suzuka to inform the protagonist if there was a sudden attack of monsters. After that, the leader of the numbers suggested that the boy should properly enjoy his last day at school. Hiroya was very nervous because he didn't have good memories of his school life. Suddenly, a loud voice called the protagonist from behind. He turned around and saw the imposing figure of Director Okabe above him. The boy's eyes remembered the bad moments of how this terrible man had humiliated him throughout his school life. Now Director Okabe was looking at Hiroya with an evil look again. The boy was already starting to make excuses for his few days of absence, anticipating another beating. But suddenly the principal smilingly patted the protagonist on the shoulder, and said that a couple of extra absences were not a problem for the pride of the school. Such an abrupt change in the director's tone made the boy very cautious. Suddenly, he heard several girls in the crowd enthusiastically pointing in his direction, saying that he was that legendary number candidate named Koigami Hiroya. Hiroya was finally speechless when someone in the crowd recognized him as the man who had defeated the Basabe during the recent incident. He immediately opened the first news site he could find on his phone and saw himself on the front page. His appearance at school caused quite a stir. Questions about the numbers and their participation in that battle were coming from all over. Everywhere, he received admiring looks, and people were attentive to every word he said. Suddenly, a tall, blond man in a red jacket appeared in the crowd and made his way directly towards the protagonist. This burly man was one of Tamba's gang members. In response to another insult, Hiroya nervously said that he had heard that Tamba was hospitalized. Unexpectedly, the bully said that he was not interested in the fate of his leader. In addition, he called the protagonist an amazing guy. The bully whispered to him that he was a big fan of Memo Mashernum, and asked the guy to get his autograph at the first opportunity. Hiroya said that he had already seen her in real life, which incredibly excited the crowd. Seeing the enthusiastic looks of the school students, the boy could not believe what was happening. It turns out that school can still be interesting and fun. The last day gave him a storm of emotions and unforgettable moments. Sitting outside during his lunch, Hiroya thought about how happy he was with his current situation. For a moment, he even thought that he would miss this place. The boy realized that he could never return to this time, and that made him sad. Before he knew it, a large car crashed through the schoolyard fence. When the dust cleared, Hiroya looked at the driver in surprise. It was Inoue-san's secretary, who said that she had been ordered to quickly take the protagonist to the headquarters of the Numbers Association. He quickly put Hiroya in the car. Suzuka turned around and sped off towards the city center. The protagonist's classmates who were left on the shattered ground looked at him with extreme attention. In a matter of minutes, they quickly crossed several dozen blocks and ran towards the headquarters. And I was already waiting for them there now. With a smile on her face, she asked Hiroya how her last day of school had been. However, the boy was barely conscious after such a quick trip made by Suzuka. When he regained consciousness, he cheerfully said that he had never received so much attention. He assumed that it was only possible after he had defeated that Basabai. Hino smiled and said that the boy was being negative as usual, explaining that in such a situation, he would consider that everything was due to his strength. Looking devoutly into the eyes of her idol, Hiroya repeated after him that it was all thanks to his powers. After that, Inoue said that the boy would continue to accompany Minimi on missions. He explained that each of the top ranks had their own quirks, and that the guy would have endless problems. After explaining the situation, he clarified to the protagonist, if he could accept it, they are at the limit of their wits. The boy said he was ready for anything. So, Inoue asked his secretary to tell more details about the incident that happened recently. The girl explained that she would have to make a small introduction to the topic first, taking the diagram. In his hands, he explained that monsters use portals to move from their world to the human world. As with data transfer, stronger monsters take longer to move. Looking at the boy's face, she asked him why he was laughing. Hiroya explained that the scheme was very funny to him. Thank you. Suzuka then nervously shouted that it was time for the boy to grow up and focus on the matter. After that, he continued to explain. Thus, the high-grade portal shows a counter until the movement of the Basabe ends. When it ends, the monster appears. The girl then explained that a strange portal had recently opened in Yokohama. They were nicknamed the portal that produces nothing. After they appeared, high-ranking tanks were sent to guard the surrounding area and wait for the monsters to appear. However, no one ever left the portal, and they asked the staff to continue monitoring them. After a while, the portal suddenly collapsed, but instead of a Basabe, something called a black fog came out. When the boy asked what the fog was, Inoue explained that it made radio communication difficult and reduced visibility inside his radio. As there had not been similar situations yet, and the effects of the fog were not fully understood, it was decided to increase the number of tanks surrounding the area. The boy was assigned the task of entering the area, helping to evacuate employees, and sealing the portal. Just when the protagonist thought that it was simply impossible to do it, he heard the voice of someone behind him. Turning around, Hiroya saw a man with blood gushing out of his mouth. He was a wounded man, barely able to stand, barely able to spin a few words. He addressed Inoue, raising his head. The stranger said that he had now been permanently killed by the Basabai, and would no longer be able to help humanity. Taking a few more steps around the office, he collapsed, gasping that another number would have to be assigned to the current mission. Terrified, Hiroya ran to the man, recognizing him as one of the numbers called Izaki. Not knowing what to do, the boy turned to his idol and shouted that they should help this man. However, Inoue's gaze at that moment was filled with shame. When the screaming stopped, he told his colleague that he should stop acting like a child and reminded him that there was no point opposing missions in such a way. After those words, Sasaki took a deep breath. Turning to the injured man, Hiroya saw that the man was calmly getting up. In the same second, the cast on his arms cracked and fell apart. Putting the crutch on his shoulder, Sasaki replied to number 1 that it hurt to hear that. Suddenly, he approached the protagonist and asked who he was, pointing out that he had not seen him around here before. Before the boy could answer, the face of his interlocutor showed a grimace of pain again. He fell to the ground again and began to say that it hurt him to think, to stand, and even to sit. Without understanding what was going on here, the protagonist replied that his name was Koigami Hiroya. In response, Sasaki indifferently replied that he had heard about a guy who had caused such a fuss in the association. Then he turned to Inoue and asked him to give him an order to go to Yokohama so that he could take care of the problem quickly. Number 1 accepted his colleague's offer and assigned him to this mission. But then Inoue added that in addition to closing the portal, he would have to take Hiroya with him and train him as an instructor. Such a complication of the task was not in Saisaki's plans. Overwhelmed with despair, he screamed all over the room. Sasaki exclaimed that he hadn't signed up for something like this and that he didn't want to do such an annoying task. Hino tried to calm his colleague down by saying that informing the candidates was part of the duties of the numbers. Startled, Sasaki shouted that his least favorite word was decision, as he didn't want to think for himself unnecessarily. Lying on the ground, he continued to beat hysterically and shouted that the whole thing bothered him. This kind of antics from one of the strongest people in the world finally made Hiro. He already realized that these people were not right in the head. After a while, a helicopter took off from the headquarters of the Rank Association on the Yokohama side. The fog-shrouded city came into view. He shouted to his partner that he could see the place where the fog was coming from. Peeking out, the boy saw a number beating hysterically, screaming that he was afraid of heights due to aerophobia. Fainting incessantly, Sasaki shouted that such flights were a discrimination against numbers. After some hysterical screams, she finally fainted. The guy nervously looked at the number and convinced himself that this rank was not well mentally. After a while, the helicopter dropped the heroes off near the fog. The protagonist stated that this looked very sinister from the outside and wondered what was going on inside. Remembering that they needed to seal the portal, the boy turned to his partner and asked how to do it. However, the latter was again hysterical on the floor, screaming that at times like this he suffered from muscle pain, malnutrition, and cranial depression. Leaving the panicked number on a nearby bench, Hiroya decided to walk alone through the fog. Realizing that his partner had left him no other choice, the boy wondered why he was still one of the numbers. Hiroya nervously looked into the fog and wondered if he could make it through on his own. After sorting out his thoughts, the boy decided that for the sake of Inoue, who believed in him, he would do anything. But as soon as he barely touched the fog, he was immediately sucked inside. Meanwhile, the purple smoke continued to spread through the city and reached the bench where Sasaki was lying. The number warily pronounced that he was still not allowed to rest. Meanwhile, the protagonist was being dragged deeper and deeper into the fog. After a while, he was thrown into a dark shroud. The visibility around him was almost nil, and it was impossible to see where in the city he was. Hiroya surmised that the advance teams were probably also dragged into this fog in a similar way. Just when he thought he might find them here, he was immediately attacked by something. Turning away sharply, the boy tried to get a good look at his opponent. However, to his great surprise, instead of an opponent, Hiroya saw several hands extending towards him directly from the fog. What he saw made him think that this fog was a single big basabe. The protagonist realized that a tough battle was waiting for him and activated his infinite awakening ability. He successfully dodged the blows of the misty hands several times. After waiting for the right moment, Hiroya tried to attack the creature, but suddenly his hand slipped through the mist. The scattered entity began to form new limbs. The boy realized that he could not do harm with simple attacks. While he was pondering on what he could do, suddenly, a blow from the monster reached him. Hiroya had no problem blocking the blow, which was incredibly powerful, but before he knew it, he was grabbed by another hand in the same second. The boy could not move, and several of the creature's hands were already approaching him. The basabai began to give blow after blow to the protagonist. The battered Hiroya was trying to figure out why his attacks were going through him, while the monster had no problem hitting him. Gathering all his strength, he freed himself from the tenacious grip of the creature. Realizing that his efforts would not be enough to win now, he decided to retire. Hiroya decided that the only thing dumber than fighting in the enemy's domain might be fighting an enemy whose characteristics you don't know. With these thoughts, he sped towards the exit. Lying on the bench, Sasaki felt that the boy had decided to run away. He figured, I must have some kind of plan. While hiding behind one of the houses, the protagonist saw hands flying by. This meant that the creature was looking for him. Besides the fact that the monster could see in such darkness, Hiroya assumed that the Basabai had a main body somewhere that controlled those hands. Trying to search for information in the depths of his memory, the boy recalled reading a book once about all the Basabai. It described the story of how one of the rank encountered a liquid monster, later named Slime. Such creatures could control water and attack with it. Hiroya remembered that that rank had used a rather risky method to defeat the slime. Even while reading the story, the boy was wondering if such a thing was applicable to fighting the Basabai. Walking further down the block, he suddenly came across something that shook his teenage mind. Several ranks were suspended by an invisible force in the air and showed no signs of life. Horrified, the protagonist recognized these people as the advance party sent earlier to explore this fog. The initial feeling that all these men were dead was false. They were still breathing, but it was as if they were in a deep sleep. Hiroya decided to save them at all costs, as time was inexorably running out. Creating a powerful burst of aura, he shouted to draw the monster's attention to himself. Feeling that the monster was approaching in front of him, the boy ran in that direction. Suddenly, the space in front of him became as bright as in broad daylight, and 10 misty blades flew towards him. Hiroya hadn't had so many goals at once. Putting himself in a protective posture, the protagonist tried to cover himself from the blows that cut the skin. After waiting for a moment, he quickly escaped the monster's blows and headed in the direction where this Basabei's aura was coming from. However, at the end of the road, he unexpectedly came across a dead end. Suddenly, behind him, Hiroya heard an unusual growling sound. When he turned around, he saw a creature in front of him that looked like a goblin. Realizing that he was the owner of this ability, the guy accelerated at an incredible speed, literally vaporizing in front of the monster. The monster looked around confused, looking for the man, but he was much faster than the creature, and was already preparing to attack him from above. Having absolute superiority over the monster, Hiroya prepared to kill him without fail. But at that moment, Saisaki, who was lying on the bench, realized that he would have to intervene after all. Moments before the coup, the protagonist's powers abruptly stopped working. Bewildered, he landed on the ground and looked at the goblin with a scared look. He did not understand how it could have happened and thought that maybe Mugen was the culprit. But the latter just laughed heavily inside the boy's head without giving him any clues. The action of the infinite awakening was interrupted. The protagonist saw an alert that the skill would be available in 120 seconds. Suddenly, he heard Mugen talking to him. Laughing wickedly, the demon said that one could not use his power as if it were water. Stretching lazily, Sasaki pointed out with frustration that the boy without the skill wouldn't last long. Covering his hand from the sun, he called the boy an idiot. Meanwhile, the goblin looked questioningly at the hero who had almost killed him. Realizing that something had happened to the boy, he began to dance with happiness. There was nothing stopping him from taking down that annoying brat now. Looking at the monster's face, the boy realized that he was going to do something about it. At the same instant, a dark vortex surrounded him. In the flashes of purple flames, someone's claws appeared. A few seconds later, a huge monster hovered over the helpless Hiroya. With a frightened glance at the huge monster, he realized that the goblin had transformed into a new entity. The Basabei immediately dealt a devastating blow to the protagonist. The creature's fist slammed into Hiroya's face, knocking him to the ground. Barely unconscious, the boy raised his head to look at the chart indicating the skill. It was still a long time before the infinite awakening could be reactivated. Hiroya had already decided that he had lost this battle when a light shone brightly ahead. The protagonist saw Sasaki running to his aid. He ran to her aid as fast as he could, but realized that his time was running out. The next second, the monster's powerful energy beam pierced through the protagonist's body. Bleeding, Hiroya fell to the ground in front of the monster's feet. At that very instant, the infinite awakening ability was activated again. A sign appeared on the main character's body, indicating the missing skill. Seeing this, Sasaki finally decided that it was too late, but suddenly, a bright column of blue flame sprouted into the sky from the almost lifeless body of the young man. Within seconds, the wound, a gaping hole in his body, was gone. It made Saseki tense up. I've never seen anything like this before. The boy, who seemed to be dead until a moment ago, suddenly opened his eyes and began to breathe. Turning around, he put his hands on the floor and sucked air greedily with his mouth. What he saw quite surprised the numbers. With a trembling voice, he asked his protege if he was okay. The boy looked up surprised and saw Saseki in front of him. Looking at the potential candidate at the numbers, Saseki realized that he hadn't even noticed that his body had been pierced. Then he realized what Inoue's plan was. The perplexed monster, meanwhile, continued to stalk people. Despite all of Hiroya's warnings, Sasaki didn't even flinch the moment the Beisuke tried to attack him. It was then that the protagonist saw in his mentor's hand a brightly colored object that looked like a key. Holding the key directly in front of him, Sasuke cast a spell. In the same second, a lock-shaped seal was placed on the huge monster. Turning around, Sasuke walked away from the place, adding that if you forget to close the door, you will ruin your life. The protagonist looked fearfully at the creature that seemed to have frozen in place. The number indifferently explained that he had frozen the creature, and that it would not move until he wanted to. A shocked Hiroya was ordered by his mentor to destroy the creature. Stopping, Sasaki suddenly asked the guy who gave him the idea to look for the main body in the fog. The protagonist explained that he had already read about all the famous Beisuke and how to defeat them. The example of a hero from the past who had done everything possible to destroy a hitherto unknown monster had encouraged him. Iruya couldn't even imagine that the same hero was Sasaki. The legendary fighter recalled how inspired he had been during those years and how eager he was to destroy all those monsters. He made a promise to himself that, at the cost of his life, he would help humanity and exterminate the Beisuke. Sasaki had a hard time remembering this because so much had changed since then. The boy noticed the change in his mentor's face and asked him what was wrong. The number smiled and said that the guy was too annoying. Suddenly, the fog began to dissipate, and the sun was visible again in the narrow neighborhoods of Yokohama. Looking at a neighborhood of the liberated city, the protagonist recalled the captured advance party he had recently seen. But before he knew it, the street was covered by dozens of portals. The portals appeared in amazing numbers at a no less amazing rate. The numbers sadly declared that all these portals were hiding high-ranking monsters. Before they could not be seen because of the fog, but the worst thing was that the monsters only fit according to go out. As soon as the heroes came to their senses, dozens of giant-sized Beisukes appeared in front of them. Originally, they had not counted on such a large number of high-class monsters. Unexpectedly, Hiroya, Sasaki sighed deeply and said that all this was very good for him. Bothering too much, he prepared to use his skill, which seemed much stronger this time. The next instant, a powerful burst of aura enveloped Sasaki. It was nothing like what Hiroya had expected to see. He was bathed in a brilliant light by the colossal release of energy. The skill Hiroya had never heard of before was called Sekurinku. Sasaki told his student that he only did it because the whole thing bothered him. So it was better for the boy to look carefully and not blink. Hiroya had never heard of abilities being awakened additionally. Rather, his mentor was a truly legendary figure. His appearance made one tremble before him, and his aura dazzled just by seeing her. Not wanting to wait, one of the monsters directly attacked Saseki. Seeing this, the protagonist decided to warn his mentor. However, the monster managed to reach the protective aura, after which his body literally vaporized before his eyes. For a moment, no trace of the huge insect remained. Such a colossal and never-before-seen power made the boy feel afraid. He had only experienced this kind of awe before when he saw Mugen. What he saw also encouraged the devil. It was likely that he had finally found a worthy opponent. Dozens of different creatures pounced on the number at the same instant. Hiroya tried to reason with his mentor, shouting that there were too many of them. But Sasaki only moved his finger once, and all the monsters stopped. After that, a key appeared next to each lock seal. With another flick of his finger, Sasaki activated the following ability, which caused all the monsters to break into small pieces. Hiruya watched in silence, unable to say a word. Among the pieces of the monster's bodies falling from the sky, he caught his mentor's gaze. The protagonist assumed that the number 4 had never unleashed Nomer's full potential in yesterday's fight with him. If that was Nomer's real power, then originally he had no chance of winning. Suddenly, Sasak's face changed drastically, and once again began to say that he was tired. Falling to the ground, the hero began to cry, saying that he could do nothing more, and asked the boy to call a helicopter. Hiroya excitedly ran to his mentor, saying that he had never seen anything cooler, and started asking what that skill was. He tried to ask the number if he could reply to it, to which he received the answer that under no circumstances could he master the technique. Sasaki then added that he should not underestimate Nome, which finally left the boy in a stupor. Putting a hand under his head, the mentor pointed out that it was not his original plan to show this skill to anyone. Suddenly, his calmness was replaced by irritation again, and he shouted that such an intense battle had caused him aggravated muscle aches, appendicitis, and hemorrhoids. Smiling, Hiroya reminded him that his mentor had barely moved during the fight. Sasaki stopped screaming then, and looked thoughtfully at the sky. He recalled asking Inut recently if it was really a good idea to unleash such abilities. In that conversation, Sasaki had tried to refuse to demonstrate this power. "I didn't want any boy to get involved in this matter." The leader of the numbers then declared that this unicorn surely wanted to be aware. Sasaki sharply interrupted his interlocutor, saying that the guy could not love him without even knowing it. Hino responded by pointing out that someone as lazy as Sasaki is rarely that persistent. The leader of the room offered as a compromise to do what he asked, and in return, Saiseki would be exempted from 1 week's chores. An offer so useless that Saiseki took it aggressively. Feeling this, Inoue told her partner that her daughter would blindly be happy if her father spent more time with her. Sasuke sighed deeply as he realized that he didn't have many options. Scratching his head, he accepted the deal. Lying in front of his apprentice, he said that it would take him at least 10 years to realize this skill. But Hiroya was not surprised at all. He shouted that he was willing to work hard to become stronger. Despite what he said, the protagonist realized that it was unlikely that he would be able to master this skill, because even now he was fighting not for his own strength, but for that of the monster. Suddenly, the mentor reminded his subordinate that he still had the skill. Those words sounded strange considering what the number had already managed to see. However, the boy confirmed it. During all this conversation, the protagonist did not see the strange crows that were flying in circles above them. These creatures were no ordinary birds. His vision was controlled by a second number called Meikyo Kurusu. Standing behind Inoue, he said everything was going according to his plan. The leader of the numbers, who had watched the whole fight from start to finish, said that, as expected, this guy had the ability. Kurusu, in turn, replied that showing a brat the Sekirin Kaiku was unwise. This ability has been hidden from both the government and the people for years. Its disclosure to the world could upset the global balance of power. Inut laughed at what was said, and repeated the old phrase about how they should not become Prometheus, who gives fire to humanity, but reminded his companion that the man who had consumed the Basabala had returned again. Looking at the chained figure, Inut added that time, which had stopped that day, had begun to move again. With the battle successfully completed, the heroes returned to the central office. Lying in the car, Sasaki exclaimed that he didn't want to go anywhere. His student, whom he had forced to behave, urged the teacher to stop complaining when someone else was doing his job for him. Constantly arguing with each other, they headed to Seika and I's room. Suddenly, the door opened, and the number 13 came out of it. Without changing the expression of his face, he walked past the protagonist and whispered that he had not lost. Knowing his situation, Sasaki pointed out that Hiroya seemed to be causing a lot of problems for Kusanagi-K, and that the boy should be careful. However, he himself wanted a rematch with the Appenidizo. After the door opened, Inoue appeared and said that he had been waiting for them for quite some time. He praised the two ranks for a mission well done. Next to the leader of the hall, there was an unusual girl with a white robe and a bow on her head. The protagonist, stunned, ran up to her and shouted in her face that she was the number 8 named Oyuan Kazaki. Suddenly, she grabbed the boy's face and said his name. Then he came over and licked her cheek. The protagonist immediately jumped to the side and screamed. Embarrassed, he asked the girl what she had just done. She responded by saying that she really tasted like biscuit. Without letting him ask another question, Kisaki ordered the boy to show his status. With a smile, she glanced at the boy's card. The girl stated that it was no wonder that some idiots took it as a weakness. He said that the script in the skill column was not a weakness, but only a disadvantage. Without understanding anything, the protagonist asked him what he meant. Kisaki said irritably that idiots don't really converse with idiots. Number 8 explained that less in this situation meant canceling. This ability allows its wielder to reduce the power of 0 base guards. The protagonist tried to ask another question, but immediately received a scathing slap. The leader of the numbers said that there must be some way to activate this ability. As an example of its use, it could be a situation where the wielder of the ability received lethal damage. But the main function of this ability, according to Inut, was to help suppress the inner demon of the protagonist. Hiroya realized that he had had the ability for these 6 years, and had been using it constantly. It turns out that if all this time, I had known how to use this skill, I could have avoided all this humiliation. The realization of this truth made the boy cry. At that moment, their conversation was interrupted by Kisaki, who said that he did not like speculation, and that the guy needed to be dissected to confirm it. When he heard the last word, the boy got very scared and backed away again. Before she knew it, a foot suddenly came out of the number 8's mouth. The first leg was followed by the second, and then the arms. After finishing ejecting the whole body, the girl wiped her mouth and said that it was beautiful. Right in the middle of the room lay an exact replica of the protagonist. Such a horrible skill made the boy scream in exhaustion. Besides, now everyone present could see him naked without any problems. The girl was surprised that the brat had not been told that his skill was reproduction. He could read biological information and create dolls. They were not alive, but their tissues were similar to humans. Sasaki commented once again that this skill was in very bad taste. Kiseki responded by saying that he was nostalgic for Sasaki's autopsy. The man immediately fell to his knees and said it was torture for him to see his body being opened. With tears in her eyes, she assured her student that it was not something worth watching. He said with delight that he couldn't wait to dissect the man who had consumed the basabai. Suddenly, the puppet raised his hand and grabbed the girl by the neck. The image of the figure changed to demonic. The inhuman voice ordered Kazaki to stop touching him so carelessly. The strong protagonist was surprised that a piece of Mugen's mind had been recovered along with his body. Kisaki was not confused, and, the next moment, he cut the hand into pieces. Taking the doll by the hair, he dragged her to another room, adding that he would report the results later. Seeing how carelessly they dragged his copy, the boy thought that he could have been a little more delicate. Hino said it was difficult for Kisaki to find free time, but insisted that it was about the hope of humanity. He explained that humans and basabai are two sides of the same process, but it was Hiroya who, by taking the best of both races, would be able to overcome them. It was because of his faith in the boy that Inut ordered Saiseki to demonstrate the Sekirin Keiko skill. However, this technique is secret and is only available for numbers. However, he believed that the boy would be able to rise through the ranks in a short time. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a violent jolt. The face of the leader of the numbers was suddenly distorted by panic. He felt extremely pressured. Approaching the window, Inoue tapped it, adding that he hoped it wasn't the monster he attacked 6 years ago. Trying to allay the suspicions, Hiruya reminded him that the monster had been destroyed then. Inut replied that that was only the official version, and that in reality, that Basabai had simply disappeared. Just when the protagonist thought that he should tell the whole truth, Inu looked at him and said that as soon as he saw the creature that had killed his beloved, he would destroy it immediately. The boy's eyes filled with fear. Mugen, who had been watching this conversation, laughed maliciously. He realized that now was the perfect opportunity for everything to change. But at that moment, a member of the association staff rushed into the room and shouted that a portal had been opened that he had never seen. The meter on that portal showed an extremely long period of 1 year, something that hadn't happened in 6 years. Upon hearing this news, Inut sadly announced that they had 1 year to prepare for an attack by a disaster-rank Beisuke, exhaling. Sadly, Saseki stated that one problem was being replaced by another, as usual, and No then turned to Hiroya, saying that it didn't seem like they had time to celebrate. At this point, the protagonist got much more serious and promised his idol that he would definitely become a Nomer. It's been a year since the protagonist, along with his new mentor, saved Yokohama from the mysterious fog. The city center was worried. A man was urging his companions, saying that they had finally got their seats on the train. On the way, he reprimanded them, saying that they had to get out of there immediately, or they would not survive an incident like the one 7 years ago. Suddenly, the city's PA sirens sounded. As several people stared fearfully at the speaker, a portal opened behind them. The next second, a Beisuke came out of it, immediately attacking the pedestrians who had let down their guard. People scattered to the sides, and a few moments later, a bright light shone in the sky. Then something with great speed crashed into the monster's body. The smoke dissipated, and everyone saw a Beisuke hunter who, with a single blow, opened a huge hole in the monster's body. When people around him asked who he was, the boy replied that he could not be mentioned. Finally, he said he was glad that everyone had been saved. A loud voice behind him ordered the boy to keep pulling the car. Enraged, Hiroya asked his teacher to stop exploiting the locals. Sasaki added that they had better hurry, as Inut was already waiting for them. The protagonist agreed with his teacher and looked up to the sky. It had been a whole year since I had been in the ranks of the ranks. After a while, they arrived at Inoue's office. There, they were greeted by Suzuka, who informed them that the leader of the numbers was not present at that time. Desperate, the boy claimed that Inoue had called him to this very place. To this, Suzuka replied that number 1 was waiting for him in a completely different place. As they were walking down the stairs, the girl asked the boy about his recent trip to America to kill another Beisuke. Hiroya said that it had gone well and without any problems. Suzuka also noticed that the boy's physique had improved a lot during use. Senior year. Finally, they descended to a dark room with a bright light at the end of the hallway. The girl explained that this was the training ground of numbers. This is also where they test the strength of the number candidates. Further into the room, Hiroya saw his idol, to whom he immediately ran. And No, at this moment, was observing the characteristics of the protagonist. The boy had managed to climb to the 12th place in the list of the best ranks in the world. The leader smiled and said that the first thing to do was to see if the boy's abilities corresponded to that place. Activating his ability, he turned around to face Hiroya and asked if they should train. Getting serious, Inoue suggested that they train until the protagonist managed to land the first blow. He said it was time for him to show his strength. Hiroya is only more amused by such a suggestion. If his idol allowed him to use all his power, then Inoue would acknowledge it. For the protagonist, this was one of the best moments of his life. After activating the Infinite Awakening skill, he thanked Inoue out loud for this opportunity. At the same instant, the boy seemed to evaporate. Soon, Hiroya attempted a quick punch, which Inoue easily dodged. Changing direction in the air, the boy attacked the leader of the numbers with a two-handed attack. The number 1 dodged with incredible ease the punches that would have been difficult for the human eye to follow. The speed the boy had reached during the year had pleasantly surprised Inoue. Then he decided to test how good the number 1 potential for repelling attacks was. Realizing that it was his turn to defend himself, the protagonist used his minus ability. After blocking a few quick punches from the leader of the numbers, he would instantly counterattack. With incredible ease, the protagonist changed the spectrum of his aura, from attack to defense. During a year of constant training and battles, he had honed this skill to an incredible level. With every passing second, he was moving faster and faster, and causing more and more problems for his opponent. It got to the point where the leader of the numbers was having a hard time following the changes in Hiroya's abilities, but suddenly, The sword that had been in his opponent's right hand the whole time disappeared. At the same instant, he felt the aura of the sword multiply behind his back. As he looked up, he saw the swords pouncing on him. Then, Laura's spectrum abruptly changed, increasing the speed of her feet. Maneuvering quickly, Hiroya dodged all the swords flying at him from above. However, the boy was so engrossed in this that he did not feel Inoue approaching from behind, who then pierced him with his sword. The leader of the numbers briefly explained that the protagonist had left his rear guard unprotected. He immediately apologized, and then abruptly changed his aura, thus destroying the sword. With lightning speed, he alternated between skills, and dealt a devastating blow to Inoue, who barely had time to block the attack. The blow was so powerful that the opponents flew to different sides of the field. Still in the air, Hiroya shouted that it wasn't his intention. But then he saw that number 1 had managed to activate his shield. However, Inoue admitted that he had managed to take the hit even before the shield was activated. As he approached, he offered his hand to the young man and declared that it had been an incredible blow. At such a praise from her favorite hero, Hiroya was more than happy. The leader of the numbers also noticed that the guy had managed to master not only his powers, but also the powers of the Basabai. Hiroya explained that, for some reason, the monster inside him had stopped coming out violently, and it was as if it had become a part of him. The boy's last words had alarmed Inoue. Kisaki had summoned him earlier and told him that he had discovered something interesting about this young man. Upon entering the girl's office, the first thing the leader of the numbers noticed was the huge pile of the guy's arms and legs. Kisaki laughed and said that it was all doll parts that had become unusable. She offered to take a couple of souvenirs to her colleague, but he refused, and No asked her to get to the point and tell him about her discovery. To his great dismay, the girl indifferently declared that the boy was no longer human. After a short pause, he succinctly declared that that brat was a Basabe. Noticing that the teacher had become strangely motionless, Hiroya asked what was wrong, and No replied that everything was fine. He decided there was no cause for concern for now. Turning away a little, Hinobe suddenly said that he would very much like to know what that demon that dwelt inside the boy looked like. The protagonist perfectly remembered the words that his idol had said a year earlier. The situation had not changed since then. He was not allowed to reveal that the demon that had killed Inoue's beloved 7 years ago was inside him. Hiroya replied something inaudible. Inoue immediately interrupted him, reminding him that the special door would be opened in a week, and that he had not completed his task yet. Hiroya had come very close to getting the number title during the last year, but he had never reached it. Hino then ordered the boy to follow him, saying that he would now teach him the main requirement to join the numbers. Suddenly, a suspiciously familiar voice called the protagonist. As he approached, someone asked if the brat was a candidate for some other number. Hiroya turned around and jumped back in fear. In front of him was Kusana Heike, who at that time was already ranked 11th. That was just one position above the protagonist. However, the balance of power had changed a lot since then. Also, after Kazuki Teo left the team, there was only one vacant position left among the numbers. Hinobe, who had organized this meeting, said the two would now compete for the remaining spot. Without a second's hesitation, the two boys turned around to face each other. Staring into each other's eyes, each declared that he was the only one worthy of becoming a member of the numbers. Number is the collective term for the ranks chosen from position 1 to 10. And the specific goal of Kagami's training this year was to become a number by raising his rank to 1, but he couldn't do it. It was Kusanagi K, the current rank 11, the reason behind it. K suddenly turned around and asked what he was looking at. Kagami quickly denied that he was watching. Standing proudly, he said he can't let Kagami, who just started climbing the ladder to the top recently, surpass him. While looking at him with disdain, K further mentioned that he will be the first to master the Sekirin Kaiku and become a number. K continued to stare at him in silence without saying a word. They were descending into the depths. K remembered that Seisukezen's Sekirin Kaiku, called Kaiking, was too powerful. He got excited at the thought that he was about to learn a power enhancement method like that. The elevator was still descending. so he wondered how much longer he would have to wait to get to his destination. They finally reached their destination. There was a huge door in front of them. The door opened, radiating a bright green light, and Noah asked them both to be careful, as what was waiting for them was not known to many, and only a few numbers and limited government officials knew about it. It was a national secret-level existence. They were both surprised to see what was in front of them. There was a giant figure of something half human and half divine, held in chains, and the whole place was relatively small compared to her. And Noah told them that she's a Basabe. Her name is Eden, who was once a human. Kay told them that it reminded him of someone he knew, saving his past, and who he really is for another time. She mentioned that the essence of the Sekirin ability is granted by her. Kugami was stunned to find out this fact. Without wasting any more time, Kay told him that he wanted to learn the Sekirin Kaiku quickly. He glanced sidelong at Kugami, watching his reaction. Inoue continued to stare at him in silence for a moment. He asked them both to follow him to the stairs. They approached Eden, and Inoue mentioned a ritual called the Blessing of Eden, which was necessary to receive the Sekirin Kaiku. Kugami felt a tremendous life force there, wondering if she was really the source of that power. In the Blessing of Eden, one touches Eden's abdomen and is transported to another dimension, where he needs to fight and defeat a certain opponent, and this is the only condition for mastering the skill. Kugami asked about the opponent, whether it was a Besabalo or rather Eden herself, and also asked about the mechanism. Hearing his questions, Inoue smiled and told him that the opponent he should defeat was the same one. He will need to fight and surpass himself, and as a proof of overcoming, he will receive the skill. Kugami couldn't really understand what he said, although the answer didn't affect Kay much, as he thought it was a classic glitch. As he moved his hand to touch the abdomen, Mandine, who asked if he could just touch it since he was in a hurry, and No warned him, well, why is the Sekirin Kaiku treated as a test of the numbers? Because not everyone can stand it, since to be defeated by themselves would mean death. Kugami asked him if he would really die if he failed, and Noah asked them if they thought this test was cruel, saying some philosophical words to them. Even if this is as far as they will go, they are trying to save humanity, and it cannot be saved with words alone. Kugami started to sweat, thinking about what step he should take now. Again, it didn't affect Kay much, as he doesn't really care about such things. What's more, he didn't care about humanity at all. He extended his hand and told Inoue that he would become strong enough to challenge him. He finally touched Eden's abdomen. The next instant, he had completely disappeared. It was swallowed up. Hino praised him for being as fearless as ever. Now it was Kugami's turn. She still couldn't make up her mind and wondered what Eden really was. Inoue's words kept echoing in his mind. From behind, he heard someone telling him to give up if he didn't want to do it. He turned around and saw that it was Saisaki. Inoue asked him what he was doing in a place like this. I had heard that about being the hope of humanity, calling him trash, trying to motivate Kugami. She called him a coward, a whiner, someone who wets on the bed, instead of being the hope of humanity. He told her that he was just a small citizen with a slightly stronger sense of justice and kindness than others. Kugami burst into tears. While crying, he corrected Saiseki that he had never wet the bed, to which Saiseki looked at him askance. He wiped away tears, saying that it would be an interesting story about a small citizen trying to save humanity. He apologized to Saiseki, saying that he would not give up. Saiseki started throwing a tantrum at him, saying she wouldn't take care of him anymore and didn't even care what happened next, asking him to do whatever he wanted. As he was walking away, Inoue reminded Saiseki about another mission. Saiseki replied that he was heading there now, acting as if he had completely forgotten that such a mission existed. Saiseki left, annoyed with both of them. Kugami didn't speak out loud, but in his mind, he thanked her for motivating him. Kugami, finally motivated, touched Eden's abdomen. Meanwhile, Kay finally made it to the other side. Everything was hazy around him when he got there. I was in a place that looked like a stadium stage, surrounded by many weapons stuck in the ground. Probably remnants of other battles that happened here. He noticed someone in the middle of the fog. He saw himself standing in front of him. He looked almost identical in appearance. The only thing different was the color of his eyes. They spoke at the same time, their voices overlapping as they asked what was wrong with the other. Moreover, at the same time, they showed displeasure with each other's face. The real Key didn't like what was going on. He tried to use his skill, but realized that his skills don't work here. Meanwhile, the fake Yes could use the same skill, and they both pounced on each other, one against the other. It was too late for the real one to stop. An explosion occurred due to this ability. Kay's right hand started bleeding, and she finally understood the true meaning of this test. He tasted the blood on his hand with a cold smile. He rated this test as interesting. Meanwhile, in another place, Kugami appeared covered with fog everywhere. Look where he was teleported to. It was completely different from Kay's. The ground was a blood-red color with fossils of what was probably a dragon or dinosaur scattered around. He wondered where she was. Someone came up to him from behind and said he was glad to see him coming on his own. He smiled ominously, telling her, "It's been a while." He was surprised to see that it was Mugen. Meanwhile, outside, there was a door that had been open for about a week. It was a sealing mission of a special grade door. Well, delaying the mission any longer wouldn't be good. But if the harm to just one person, including his only daughter, can be avoided, then it might be worth doing. Even if it is of a special grade, taking it lightly could cost Saisaki her life. He increased his power, activating his special ability, with a serious expression on his face. He says he should get serious now, as his student is struggling to. Back to where Kugami was, he is still confused to see Mugen there. He asked Mugen why he was there. He told her he had heard the story. Story about how to master the Sekirin. Something about him having to defeat himself. He emphasized the word to himself, laughing ominously as he asked if he had really forgotten who dwelt inside him. He took a humanoid form and told him that Kugami must defeat him now. Kugami was pushed back by the force emanating from Mugen. He tried to use his skill, but he couldn't. Mugen, extending his arms, said that he cannot use his skills in this space. He laughed more crazily, telling Kugami that now he should defeat him without skills. He laughed again, praising Kugami's expression. Mugen came up to his face and asked if he should just let him win. Kugami, still confused, asked him again what he had just said. Mugen offered him a deal, saying he had no reason to stop him. Since they shared the same body, it would be more convenient anyway. He added that Kugami wouldn't be able to beat him anyway, stating that he could see straight through his thoughts. Just when Mugen was saying that Kugami should feel relieved, Kugami suddenly punched him in the face. His gaze turned cold, and he stopped laughing, with the anger clear on his face after hearing that offer. Kugami told Mugen to come at him with everything he had. Mugen started laughing ominously again, saying that she would kill him for refusing such a generous offer. The scene changed to the place where Eden was contained, while Mr. Inoue was enjoying quietly from his tea. He asked Suzuka how long it had been since they entered, and she replied that it had been an hour, 17 minutes, and 20 seconds. He praised the tea she made, not realizing how quickly time had passed thanks to its taste. While sipping slowly from her cup, he said it would probably take much longer. Suddenly, he realized that someone was standing behind him. It was that he was not seriously injured. Only the sleeve on his right side was broken. He was standing there, calmly, as if nothing had happened. Defeating a version of himself with all his specs under the restriction of not using abilities wouldn't have been an ordinary test, even for someone like Kay. Still, it wasn't a big deal for him, as he deciphered the test condition almost immediately. Although he thought it would be much more difficult for Kugami. He asked Inoue if, now that he had completed the test, he was finally a member of the numbers. Inoue calmly replied that this was not a competition, and that there was a chance that neither of them would survive. However, if Kugami did not return, Kei would become a member of the numbers. Kei then asked what would happen if Kugami also mastered the Sekir in Kaiku and came back, smiling while holding his cup of tea. And No said that they would think about that when the time came. He got up and wondered what Kugami was doing inside. Meanwhile, inside the test, Kugami was still fighting Mugen. He kept hitting him repeatedly, but Mugen didn't move an inch. Kugami jumped as he turned quickly. He kicked Mugen's head while trying to land. Even so, Mugen endured every attack. His eyes were glowing red, and a strange blue aura surrounded him. It was as if all the attacks were being neutralized. This had to be the power of the minus ability, which could override abilities or powers of the Basabai. Kugami felt uneasy, wondering how Mugen had mastered this skill in such a short time. Suddenly, the silhouette of a monstrous and massive hand appeared above him. Mugen's hand was enveloped in a dangerous aura as it turned into a gigantic arm. He slammed his arm to the ground. He laughed again when he saw Kugami lying there, saying that he wasn't done yet. Kugami was lying on the ground. His body split into two halves at the height of the abdomen. With an even more twisted smile, Mugen raised his hand towards him and used the skill less. Both halves of Kugami's body connected again. Surprised to find himself alive, Kugami crawled back as Mugen walked towards him. Mugen raised his hand to attack once more. This time, Kugami was killed for the second time. That still wasn't enough for Mugen. He used less again and killed him once more. 280. He repeated the process over and over again. Mugen praised the skill. Less, calling it extremely convenient. Kugami didn't know that less could be used in this way. He thought that he had developed the skill by training, but the use of Mugen seemed like magic from another dimension. Still wanting to play, Mugen asked what other powers Kugami could use. Kugami told him that she would never forgive him for using such an ability for fun. That skill was meant to save and protect people. Mugen didn't like to hear that and asked what kind of restriction was that. He said that by limiting the scope of the skill, Kugami could only see it as a defensive technique. Now he would show his true potential, telling her to crawl over and watch. Mugen's right hand began to glow red. His left hand began to glow blue. He fused both hands together, creating an even stronger attack. This was something that had never crossed Kugami's mind. Mugen was nullifying his own attack by using the minus skill. Kugami remained there, unable to get up, staring at Mugen. The nullified power suddenly disappeared from Mugen's hands and reappeared behind Kugami. Mugen gave a final warning, saying that such a power was not something to be used lightly, because in this world, nothing really comes back to nothing. It was a simple truth, one that anyone could understand if they stopped to think about it for a moment. Mugen finally unleashed the huge sphere towards Kugami. Sasuke's words echoed in Kugami's mind, telling him that he still lacked imagination. In a flashback, Kugami asked what imagination meant, and Saseki replied that Kugami's life was full of despair, believing that he did not have any abilities, and that if he improved his imagination, he could finally transform. Kugami fell into an endless green abyss, thinking that he could still hold on to something, and that he couldn't die yet. He held out his hands, as he was not someone who would just give up. Eden appeared behind him as he continued to fall. He called Kugami an Indomagus. Through that indomitable spirit, she said, he would reach the true awakening, and she caught him in her palms. A bright flame appeared in front of Mugen. He was surprised to see the fire. In front of him was Kugami, who had just unleashed his Sekirin Kaiku, Kagen Juice, Phantom Purification. Mugen couldn't believe it. Kugami had awakened his own Sekirin Kaiku. Kugami's body started to turn into bubbles after passing the test. He disappeared from that place. Mugen didn't seem pleased. Still confused as to why he had let the boy win, he ignored him, thinking he was fine. The stronger Kugami became, the more food he would provide Mugen. Mugen looked at Eden and said he never expected to find her in a place like this, calling him nostalgic and asking how she had been. Meanwhile, in the real world, Kugami appeared before Inoue and Kei. He slowly opened his eyes. They both stared at Hiroya. Hiroya looked stunned, unable to believe that he had actually passed the test. He ran to Inoue, full of happiness, saying that he had learned and mastered the Sekirin Kaiku. Inoue started stroking his head. He congratulated him as he did so. Inoue smiled kindly and told him that he had tried very hard, which made Kugami a little excited by his words. Disgruntled, Kei asked why he hadn't received a single word of congratulations. He angrily complained that Inoue had favoritism, saying that it was unfair since he kept the 11th rank and should have been praised more. However, Sasaki had been assigned as Kagami's mentor, and Inoue was still paying extra attention to him. Kagami turned to Kei, wondering why he was so angry. Then he realized. He understood this reaction. It was jealousy. Observing Kei while talking to Inoue, Kagami realized that he also wanted to be recognized, and found himself comparing Kei to his own feelings. He extended his hand towards Kei, and said that they should keep striving together. Kei, however, looked at him with disdain, and asked him why he was acting so upset. Annoyed, Kei asked what they were supposed to do now that their battle to the death was over, and they had survived after mastering the Sakurin. Hiroya replied that that was exactly what he had been waiting for. Suddenly, an announcement came saying that Saiseki was on a mission and required reinforcements. Inoue confirmed that Saiseki was currently at a special grade gate, but to his surprise, a special grade calamity had appeared. He wondered if something had happened there that forced Sasaki to activate his Sekir on Keiko. There was no point in speculating anymore. Kagami asked Inoue for permission to immediately go to the location of the gate. Inoue smiled and commented that Kagami had become reliable. He immediately asked Suzuka to make the preparations, but everything had already been completed without him having to ask for it. It was Suzuka's ability called Guide Gate or Judo Gate. It works like a door to anywhere. Think of a place you want to go and you will get there. The same thought crossed Kagami's mind, and he compared it to a door to any place. Everyone came through the door. The door appeared directly in front of the special grade door. When Inoue and Kei arrived, they saw many corpses scattered on the ground. They were the flanks who had been accompanying Sasaki. As expected, the traces of a special grade were different. But the appearance in the countdown system of the doors was similar to ordinary doors. Still, Inoue commented that the fact that Saiseki activated his ability against an opponent meant that this calamity was far from ordinary. He wondered what the hell had happened here. Kei stood there watching the scene in silence. He looked for Kagami, but he was nowhere to be seen, since they had entered through the same door at the same time. Where could Kagami have gone? Then they realized that Kagami could have thought of a different destination and ended up somewhere else. Kagami had already been teleported inside the door where Saiseki was. In front of him, he saw two figures skewered in a battle. It was Saiseki fighting a strange monster with no organs under the torso and multiple tentacles instead of arms. Saiseki was fighting the creature. Kagami wondered what kind of calamity it was as he watched her closely. The monster looked sinister, as if all the horrors of the world had taken shape. His mind was refusing to accept his existence, overwhelmed with fear, but he realized that it was not time to be afraid. Since Saiseki was struggling alone, knowing that he had to help in some way, Kagami ran to him. However, it was blocked by invisible chains and padlocks. It was Saiseki's padlock skill keeping him away. Saiseki told Kagami to stay away, warning him that it was dangerous and that he could handle it alone. The monster seemed to be of a special grade, but it had not yet reached its full form. That meant it was still possible to defeat him, and Saiseki unleashed another attack. The monster screamed that he could not move, claiming that he was completely immobilized. Laughing, he praised Sasaki's skill as SR rank, and thanked him as if pretending to be trapped. He spoke enthusiastically about human skills, calling himself a gamer and comparing the world to a gacha game, bragging about receiving 10 free spins as a login bonus. He complained that most of the skills he found were rubbish. Still, he openly admired Saiseki's ability, calling it divine and powerful. Kagami was confused, unable to understand the strange references the monster was making. Sasaki was irritated. Even when blocked, the monster wouldn't stop talking. His high intelligence and learning ability marked him as a real calamity of special degree. Still, Sasaki was relieved that his skill had successfully immobilized him, even as the blood started gushing from his fingernails. When he pressed harder, the bleeding got worse. Encouraged by Sasaki's strength, Kagami was cheering him on from the side. Saiseki then prepared a safe hitting technique with 0 chances of failing. The technique was called blunt unlocking. For a moment, it seemed that the monster had been defeated. Suddenly, the monster pierced Saiseki's chest with his bare hand. Saiseki coughed blood, his body slackened, as if he was already dead. He fell to his knees, and the monster's arm returned to his body. Laughing, he casually apologized, saying that he could have stopped his hand if he had wanted to. At that moment, Kugami was consumed by an indescribable emptiness. Desperately, he tried to break the chains that held him down. He activated his ability less and nullified them. I couldn't think of anything else. All I wanted was to save Sasaki. Enraged, he charged towards where Sasaki was kneeling. Another lock appeared in his way. He failed to stop it, as he broke the chains once more. In a desperate attempt to stop him, Sasaki used an even stronger lock to keep Kugami out of the fight. Kugami shouted, asking why I wouldn't let him fight and help. With a pained voice, Sasaki told him that it was good that he had mastered the Sekir in Kaiku. He admitted that he had not been a good teacher, and that he was not cut out for that role. Still, he asked Kugami to grant him one last request. He told her to run, saying this was not the place to waste her life. Tears filled Kugami's eyes upon hearing those words. The monster began to open its jaws. He was getting ready to devour Saiseki. Just before he could, Kugami forced his way through and hit the monster. The blow was so powerful that the monster flew backwards. Kugami was enveloped in a mysterious red aura, and the monster stared in disbelief, wondering how a mere human could do this to him. He promised himself that he would save Saiseki, Kogwin Jugo, and the whole place was engulfed in flames. He warned the monster that he was going to kill him. The monster laughed ominously, saying that he had received 2 divine abilities in a single roll of 10, that he felt something unusual. I could feel the pressure of someone using the Sekir in Kaiku, but it was too far away. And Nui finished issuing the emergency request to the numbers. Kei replied, asking if they really needed more numbers besides him and Inui. Looking at Kei, Inui said that subduing the special calamities was the real purpose of the numbers. And as long as there was a possibility that an opponent would be a special calamity, they should act accordingly. They both made their way to their destination by traveling through the gate. Suzuka told them to be careful. The scene returned to the battle where Kugami was in his Sekirin form. He told Saiseki that he would save him and kill the monster. With a worried look, Saiseki called Kugami an idiot. The monster continued to laugh. Suddenly, he started attacking with many tentacle-like fists. However, the attacks couldn't even scratch Kugami, as he used the ability less as a shield to block every tentacle. The monster wondered why he couldn't do anything to her. This skill was called Purification of the Floral Illusion. In other words, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. It was an extended version of the original ability called. Although Kugami had just acquired her, he felt as if she was already installed inside him. He activated the version called More, and a few blue tentacles appeared behind him. The tentacles began to climb up his arm. He then unleashed the attack towards the monster, which looked a lot like the monster's own ability. The monster shouted at Kugami not to use his attacks without permission. He attacked again with all his tentacles, declaring that unauthorized use of his abilities was unforgivable. The 2 attacks collided. However, the monster was losing against his own power, something he had never imagined. Kugami kept her gaze fixed on him, while continuously attacking with the tentacles. Then he used another version of the skill called Bai. He extended his hand, and all the tentacles spiraled in the direction he pointed. The tentacles multiplied in countless numbers, completely surrounding the monster. The monster tried to escape from the tornado formed by the overwhelming mass of tentacles. He made fun of Kugami, saying that people called him shady because of his bad personality. However, even if Kugami tried to capture the monster, it wouldn't be that easy. With Kugami's back exposed, the monster extended its arm to strike him from behind. Saiseki quickly warned Kugami. It was the same arm that the monster had detached earlier to pierce Saiseki in the back. There were no cowardly excuses in a fight where both sides risked their lives. This was a battle for survival. But if the monster was willing to fight one against many, Kugami activated his splitting ability. Suddenly, the arm that was attacking from behind was grabbed by another hand. The monster was frozen with confusion. It wasn't a one-on-one anymore. Hundreds of Kugami clones were surrounding him now. In silence, everyone watched the scene unfold. Even Sasaki was surprised to see him use such an ability. The monster panicked and called the move cowardly. Kugami told him that he was the last person he wanted to hear those words from, and attacked along with all his clones. The monster started screaming, knowing he couldn't do anything anymore. The scream was so loud that it could be heard from far away. The blue tentacles had completely grabbed him, leaving him unable to speak. I could only scream weakly. Kugami had managed to do what his master could not. While watching him, Sasaki noticed that not only Kugami's skill, but also his judgment in different situations had improved. He asked for help proudly, since his student, in a way, had overcome him. Kugami's fist began to glow red. He warned the monster that he was going to kill him. A monstrous life form appeared from the red aura emanating from his fist. The monster could see him clearly. He understood that the power Kugami was using did not belong to him, but to someone inside him. Inut approached from behind along with Kei, praising Kugami for suppressing the monster so well. They offered their help to finish him off right there. Coldly, Kugami told them not to interfere. He said he would be the one to kill the monster. Kei showed a disgruntled expression, while Inoue didn't say a word. The monster desperately asked the spirit inside Kugami for help. He kept begging for help to stop the attack, or else he would be killed. He claimed that if he died, the goal of the calamity would be delayed. A large explosion occurred in the area. The monster's body was half burned, and he was surprised to find himself still alive. Kugami asked him about the target of the calamity he had just mentioned. With a completely enraged expression, he demanded an answer immediately. He warned her that he would do it quickly and painlessly if she answered. Kugami urged him to hurry up, saying that it would soon be too late anyway, and the monster replied that he would tell everything if Kugami spared his life. Suddenly, disturbances appeared at the portal door. Tentacle-like structures began to emerge from within. They slowly formed into hand-shaped structures. The hands accelerated and rushed towards Kugami. The monster had been buying time for those reinforcements to appear. The arms completely encircled Kugami, and Nui wondered where those arms even came from. He did not notice when the arms began to tie Kugami. Kugami saw that his limbs were already tied up before he could react. The monster began to regenerate its lost parts. Kugami looked at him quickly. Even more arms approached from above. Sasaki was deeply worried to see his student in such a condition. Suddenly, a bright leaf appeared. He cut one of the monster's arms into pieces. Another arm was blown to pieces. Someone was using a video game controller to set off explosions that destroyed the arms. The monster was shaken to the core when all of his arms were destroyed in an instant by 3 unknown attackers. They all landed on the ground. The muscular man asked Inut if the monster was of a special grade. Inut was relieved that everyone had come to help. Ki, however, was not happy to see the other numbers there. The boy with a lollipop in his mouth was Okubori Manabu, rank 6 of the numbers. He asked why the special graduate was already on the last ones, after having taken the trouble to escape from the academy. The muscular man was Kiritsu Tsuyoshi, rank 7 of the numbers. He mocked Yukibori, saying that, as a child, he should never let his guard down until the end, as you never know what might happen. Yukibori felt sad to be scolded by someone of a lower rank than his, while the other man in the cap seemed to have communication problems. He only said 2 words, nasty and golden sphere. The man wearing the cap was Longhorn, rank 3 of the numbers. Kiritsu asked Okibori what Lon had just said. Okibori translated it, explaining that he had said testicles in Chinese, and that it was disgusting. Kiritsu immediately regretted asking. Okibori asked Kiritsu if the person in front of them was the one who had gone crazy with K in the numbers association, mocking him by saying that he seemed stronger. Kiritsu thought for a moment and said, maybe. Then he suddenly turned his head and asked why Yukibori always put him in everything. Yukibori smiled like a child and said that he himself was basically the weakest of the numbers, and that Sasaki had settled for being number 9, so he didn't care much. Yukibori then wondered what had happened to Sasaki. Kiritsu frowned upon hearing his words, and Nui tried to calm Kugami down, saying that he understood his feeling about defeating that monster with his own power. I wanted her to understand the weight they were carrying on their backs, the countless lives lost that day, and all the lives they are still living now. This was the burden that rested on his shoulders. Kugami remained calm for a moment. From that moment on, they would work together. They stood together declaring that they would use all their strength to kill the special grade calamity. The monster looked even happier, as if he had found multiple SRs on a roll of 10. He tried to escape from them. He wanted to defeat them all, but he couldn't be picky with his life at stake. He said this finally concluded his show as the arms that had been destroyed started to regenerate again. The moment he tried to escape, those regenerated arms started attacking them. Kugami furiously warned him not to even try to escape. The monster began to approach Saiseki, who was completely helpless and leaning on a tree. Unable to move, Saiseki could only watch as he approached. One of its tentacles extended towards Saiseki. The tentacle started to enter his mouth, and No and K were still tied in place. Kugami couldn't believe it. That I was watching. It was as if Saiseki had risen from the dead, floating on the spot. The monster had completely possessed Saiseki. One of her eyes turned black, with the iris glowing red. Everyone was shocked, as no one expected the monster to take over Saiseki's body. He was just like Kugami. The monster said that this first experience felt extremely good. He used Saiseki's ability to immobilize everyone. No one could free themselves from the chains that bound them. Then he smiled ominously and asked if he should try that special move. Everyone immediately understood which special movement he was referring to. It was the movement of that one-shot, one-kill serve, Babin Pink. Things were getting worse by the second. At this rate, they would be completely annihilated. And Nui began to envision a future where they were all dead. Fortunately, the locks and chains were cancelled by Kugami's minus skill. The three numbers couldn't believe that they had been saved by someone like Kugami. Kugami asked where Sasaki was. He was already flying over them, saying that he had underestimated them a little. He told them that he should leave now, as he wanted to go unnoticed for a while, and wait for the day when the door would open completely. He stated that his name was Jiren, and that he hoped to see them again next time in their full form. However, there was no way Kugami would let him go so easily. His left hand was covered by Mugen's red aura. He extended his Mugen arm, trying to grab Jiren before he could escape. Inut noticed that something was wrong with Kugami. For a moment, he completely forgot about Jiren's flight, and stared at Kugami. The hand was about to grab Jiren inside Sasaki's body. Jiren smiled at him and said, "Goodbye." In the end, Kugami didn't grab anything. Jiren escaped. The Mugen-like appearance slowly faded away. Kugami's expression was no longer one of surprise or sadness. He completely lost control after losing his teacher. He knelt on the ground and shouted Saiseki's name. One day after the special grade calamity incident, some numbers gathered for a meeting. And Noah informed the numbers who were not present about the incident involving Saiseki and Hiren. At present, his whereabouts were completely unknown. It was clearly their defeat, as they had mishandled the initial response from the start. Yukabori yawned and said that it couldn't be helped, since that man Saiseki always did things in unexpected ways. With a sly smile on her face, Kenjuin said that she wanted to experience a calamity herself. A special grade one day. Then he turned to Kiritsu and asked him what Jiren looked like. Just as he was about to give a long answer, Lon muttered something under his breath. Kiritsu described Jiren as a creepy presence, something that seemed to come from another dimension entirely. Even remembering it now scared him, she said as she covered Lon's mouth to stop him from talking anymore. Kanjuin casually dismissed her description, calling it boring. Kagurasaka responded angrily, saying that it was inappropriate for him to speak like that. After Kiritsu had given his information so kindly, he also added that for Inu to fight a special grade calamity alone, without informing superiors, was unacceptable, even in an emergency, and warned him not to repeat such actions. Then he clearly introduced himself as Kagurasaka and Kari, rank 5 of the numbers. Kurusu commented that the public would probably call this incident a big mistake, but he was sure that Inut would not let it end like this. Inut calmly replied that they would attack Jiren the moment their pressure was detected. He added that while they were still monitoring the special grade gate, his accountant still had 6 days left, which meant Jiren would definitely make another move. Kiritsu questioned how a calamity of a special degree could appear when the door was not completely open. Hinobo explained that Hiren had said that it would only be complete when the door was fully opened. He had a special ability that allowed him to separate his body, and it was believed that he moved using only the parts capable of transferring. If Saiseki had been present, he could have blocked the counter and bought them more time. Kanjuan quietly asked if Saiseki was still alive, and Nui replied that Saiseki had been in charge of life to manage that special grade door. Kiritsu added that Saiseki used to block the doors that couldn't be handled right away, temporarily stopping his countdown. But the counter at that particular door had suddenly started moving yesterday. The room fell silent. The commotion spread between them. Since Sasaki's ability had been released, it was safe to assume that he had passed away. No one spoke for several minutes. The silence weighed on all of them. Kiritsu finally muttered that Sasaki had remained selfish to the end. Kurosu said they would hold a funeral in his memory once the situation was resolved. This was a serious crisis, as all the locked doors throughout Japan would start to open one after another. There were more than 1,000 such places scattered all over the country, and Nui decided to assign each number to a specific door, so that they could immediately respond to any calamity that appeared. Kiritsu clenched his fist in anger, saying that he would go and beat everyone up. Yukibori, meanwhile, had not yet assimilated Sasaki's death. Kurusu asked why only a few members were attending the meeting, when there were 10 numbers in total. He then asked where Minimi was, and Inui replied that he had been assigned another matter. As for the vacancies, there was good news. It had been decided that anyone who mastered the Sakuran Kaiku would qualify to become a name. Hinobe invited someone to enter the room. It was Kusanagi K, the newly appointed rank 9 number. Kiritsu extended his hand to him for a handshake, warning him not to get carried away just because he became a number. Although K coldly rejected him, K said that he would surpass Kiritsu very soon. Yukibori excitedly asked what had happened to Kugami, mentioning that although none of the 4 members could move, he had saved them all. Kiritsu praised Kugami, saying that his pressure was decent, and that he had the courage of a strong person. Yukibori asked if Kugami would also become a number, as he wanted to fight alongside him again. Kei stood there watching his reactions, possibly feeling them once more. He clenched his fist in silence. Hinogo explained that Kugami was not present because he had turned down the offer to join the numbers. The scene changed to another area, showing Kugami still affected by Saiseki's death. A bull-like creature suddenly appeared behind him just as he was about to attack. Kugami clenched his fist as Mugen's red aura burned around him. With a single blow, he completely destroyed the monster, shattering it while his hair turned completely red. Mimimi was nearby watching him in silence. He pointed out that this was already the 6th monster he had killed. With a tired and hollow voice, he muttered next, as if he was already exhausted from killing such weak monsters. Mimimi asked him what he really wanted. He told her to get out of his way, saying he had another door to head to. She urged him to rest, reminding him that she had been hunting calamities non-stop even after what happened the day before. He remembered what Inut had told him earlier. When she insisted on hunting calamities herself, Inut had asked her instead to stay with Kugami. He had lost his teacher right in front of his eyes and was clearly depressed. She needed someone to stay by her side, and there was no one who could understand those feelings better than Minimi. He asked her why she had turned down the offer to join the numbers. He told her that Saiseki's death was not his fault. Even if he had defeated that monster at that moment, the calamity could still have taken over 6X's body. He said that was the truth, and Kugami was shocked for a few seconds after hearing it. She continued, saying that even if he was the strongest man in the world, even if he had defeated that special grade calamity, and even if the calamities had never existed, all those would make endless, she said angrily. He told her that no matter how much he fought, Saiseki wouldn't come back because he was already dead. Kugami suddenly jumped forward, trying to attack her. The bubble he had been forming with his gum burst, but he wasn't attacking her. She was attacking the monster that had appeared behind her. Kugami said that everything Minimi said was not necessarily true. He asked if anyone had seen Sasaki die. He said it was all speculation. Minimi replied that Sasaki's body had been claimed by a calamity, so it would be strange if he was still alive. Kugami interrupted her loudly, saying that he himself was the proof of a similar case. He shouted that if someone like him could take it, then there was no reason why Saiseki couldn't. That's why, no matter what others said, he would be the only one who would believe in Saiseki. Becoming a number would mean accepting Saiseki's death, and he refused to do so. Minimi asked why, if that was the case, he was acting so self-destructively. Fighting so recklessly wouldn't help anyone. Kogami replied that he did not know that it was Saiseki who had been locking the doors. Everyone's daily life had been protected thanks to him. Even if he was a little selfish, he was someone everyone should look up to. For that reason, Kogami said he would not stop. He would keep defeating calamities so that when Saiseki returned, he could receive him with pride. Minimi felt excited, although she tried not to show it. She gently hit him on the head with a stick, realizing that Kogami wasn't really depressed. I still had hope. That was one more reason for him to patrol the gates in a wide area. If he could feel Hiren's pressure, he might finally find his trail. With a hopeful expression, Kogami said that she would definitely find him. Meanwhile, a strange laughter echoed from the top of a massive tower. It was Jiren, laughing as he thought about how strong these humans were becoming. The countdown timer had gone down to 4 days and 4 hours remaining. At the Numbers Association, Inut and Kurusu were discussing the situation. Kurusu said it was strange that Inut thought they still had time. Inut replied that they did have time, but that he had sent Mimi and Kugami, just in case something appeared at the door. Kurusu reported that close surveillance was necessary, and, according to reports, almost 300 doors with the latches released had already been taken care of. Inut was silent for a moment, thinking deeply. He said he had a certain suspicion about someone, and if it was confirmed, he wondered what he should do if he was in that position. Back at the door, Kugami and Minimi were standing in front of her. She asked what the door even was and what was supposed to come out of it. According to Kugami's hypothesis, Hiren had said that it would be completed once the door was fully opened. The previous appearance had only been one torso, so perhaps the rest, like the lower half, would emerge now. They had to prevent Jiren from being completed at all costs. Mimimi was still chewing gum. He told her to relax a little, warning her that acting too furiously could make her lose control. Even Inoue and Saiseki had handled situations like this one with a surprising calmness. She shared that she too had been saved once by Inoue. At that moment, she had wanted to die, but that Inut was there and saved her. The scene changed to his memory. She was covered in blood, shaking in shock as a hand was slowly extended to her. It was the Inut hand. He hugged her and told her to become strong enough to erase her past and her weakness. That's why I was fighting for Inut. Kugami had never known anything about his past. He then told her to get a haircut, saying his current appearance made him look narcissistic. He smiled and laughed. It was the first time he had laughed since that incident, and she told him to keep laughing like that. Suddenly, something began to emerge from the door. Large structures formed legs that touched the ground. They both went on alert, thinking it must be the bottom half from Jiren. But instead, a cute little girl came out smiling and seemed to know Minimi. Kugami wondered who the girl was. Minimi, however, already knew her. A memory surfaced in his mind. In that flashback, the two of them were playing on the swings, laughing together. The girl in the blue dress was Nanami. I had asked Mimimi why he turned down the recruitment of the Numbers Association. Mimimi had smiled beaming and said that she had kicked them out because she wanted to protect Nanami. I couldn't even imagine being separated from her by the missions. With a nice smile, Nanami had thanked him. They had promised to be the best friends forever, but back then, Mimimi couldn't protect her from the monsters. Nanami came over and said that she had wanted to see her all this time, that there was something she wanted to say. Some veins started to twitch on Natami's face as she called Minimi a liar. The next instant, his lower body had already transformed into a monster. With anger in her voice, she asked if they were still best friends. She screamed in pain and rage, asking if they were really friends. So why hadn't Mimini protected her? Because of that failure, he said, Nanami had died. Mimini couldn't take it anymore. She broke down and burst into tears. Kugami didn't fully understand what was going on, but he could see that his trauma had taken shape. He realized that Jiren must be behind this. Behind them, a strange eye appeared. For Jiren, this situation was problematic, but standing in front of the door allowed him to get something unexpected. He realized that the greatest weakness of a human was the heart. Once the heart was attacked, everything collapsed because it was fragile. Minimi cried and apologized to Inui, saying that she was still not strong enough, just like he told her once. He admitted that nothing had changed since then. Still crying, she saw the monster about to devour her. Nanami laughed as her image merged with the creature. It was all an illusion. Suddenly, a fist slammed into the monster's face, sending it flying and protecting Mimimi. Of course, Kugami wouldn't let someone die right in front of him. Mimimi slowly stopped crying. There was nothing wrong with being weak. Kugami spoke calmly, saying that he also once hated his own weakness. But people become strong by accepting their pain and their struggles. In other words, weakness could also be a strength. His words got to her heart, and they worked. She finally felt a little lighter. She didn't expect Kugami to be the one to cheer her up, but thanks to him, she felt better now. She thanked Nanami and promised that she would become stronger, enough so that she would never lose anything important to her again. He activated his skill, driver, and countless musical notes began to swirl around him. He closed his eyes as he concentrated deeply on his Sekirin Keiko. A massive spiral of musical notes formed behind her. This was his technique, Bloody Requiem. He pointed the notes at Nanami and named the attack Symphony 9. The spiral wiped out everything in its path, completely destroying the fake Nanami. The technique was known as the Death March. Kugami looked shocked, stunned by his power. She laughed and told him that his face looked very funny. The attack had destroyed half of the building. This was his greatest firepower so far. Kugami still couldn't believe it, and said that he had heard rumors that she had the title of the numbers firepower maniac. She slapped him on the head, and demanded to know who was spreading such nonsense. He admitted that he had thought that Kugami would just be a shy and gloomy introvert. Even Inoue had told him that Kugami was the hope of humanity. Kugami was bleeding a little from how hard I had hit him. Meanwhile, in the massive tower, Jiren was screaming in pain as his lower half lay destroyed. He blamed Kugami, saying that if he had not interfered, none of this would have happened. A crooked smile spread across his face as the left side of his head started to transform. He declared Kugami his favorite. Kugami's phone suddenly rang. It was Inoue. He responded immediately. Kugami ran to Inui's location and asked him to come. Inui did not turn around. He stood there in silence, mourning for someone. He received a report that the other half of Hiren had been successfully destroyed. Kugami's growth really amazed him. Kugami quickly clarified that it was not he, but Mimimi who had defeated her. And Nui smiled slightly, praising its firepower, calling her the strongest among all the numbers. Still, he realized that that was not the real reason he had been called here. Inu then asked him if he remembered this place. It was where a special grade had descended 6 years ago, where he lost someone dear, but managed to save another. How could Kugami forget this place? Of course, he remembered it clearly. He turned to Inui, anger flashing in his eyes, and demanded to know if the Basabe inside him was the same special grade one. From 6 years ago, Kugami could sense that something was wrong. This was not the calm and serene Inut I knew. There was a clear and unmistakable killing intent emanating from him. Inut had lost someone precious that day, someone who meant everything to him. The same enemy who had taken everything from him now stood before him again. I could still vividly remember that day. The moment he saw the enemy while mourning his loss, and now, after 6 long years, that same enemy was right in front of his eyes. Recalling his previous conversation with Kurusu, Inut had once asked him what he would do if he were in his place. Kurusu thought about it a little. He said that although he might appear calm, he was actually short-tempered, and would probably confront them on impulse to demand answers. But as governor of the numbers, Inut had to act differently. He was expected to be an example for humanity. Returning to the present, Inut told Kugami that he did not hold any personal grudges against him. It was the Inut himself who had allowed him to live and accepted his coexistence with a calamity in the first place. However, it would be a completely different matter if that calamity turned out to be the special grade 1 from 6 years ago. For the sake of humanity, he would be forced to act. He pointed his skill towards Kugami and directly asked if the calamity inside him was really that same special degree. The fact that he was asking made it clear, and Nogue already knew the answer. What he wanted now was for Kugami to face his pain and respond. Kugami hesitated, wondering what she should say. He was about to tell the truth about the calamity inside him, but the words wouldn't come out. I felt my throat closing. Inside his mind, he was grabbed by Mugen. Mugen's hand tightened around his neck, warning him that if he dared to reveal the truth, he would kill him before Inut could. Mugen smiled, and said that if that was the case, then Mugen might as well take control and unleash the chaos himself. Mugen coldly asked if that was what he really wanted. A sudden realization hit Kugami. He understood that hiding the truth about Mugen was the right decision. After all, he had fought and become stronger with Mugen's power. He was here to protect the world from calamities and to bring Saiseki back. He gently apologized to Inui. Then he said that the calamity inside him was not of a special degree. To prove it, he showed his power, explaining that he had now become a part of it. He promised to create a world free of calamities, and, with the help of Inut, he would risk everything, his own life, Mugen's power, even his minus ability to achieve it. That's why I needed Inui's strength. Once his mission was complete, he vowed to sacrifice himself if necessary. He just asked for a little more time to prepare. Inut glared at him, fury burning in his eyes, asking if he was really siding with a calamity. Kugami panicked, trying to explain himself, but before he could, a familiar voice behind him told him to calm down and stop acting like a child. That voice was one I could never forget. It was Saiseki, gently patting him on the head, calling him a basket case, and saying he still needed him. But something in that voice didn't feel right. There was a tone in her that the real Saiseki would never use. Kugami turned sharply, attacking without hesitation, knowing exactly who he was. The figure smiled, his jaw stretched unnaturally as he revealed himself. It was Jiren. Chains sprouted from his hand, wrapping Kugami tightly, but they couldn't hold him for long. Kugami smashed them to pieces using his minus skill. Jiren just smiled, saying that he wouldn't even minus stop what was coming next. He raised his hand and activated psychokinesis, causing the floor tiles around him to rise into the air. It was an ability that Saisuke had never possessed. All the tiles shot towards Kugami like a storm of blades. He clenched his fist and tried to punch one away, but the moment he touched it, the surface became sticky, and a thick adhesive began to ooze. It was another of Hiron's skills. He had used adhesion, making all the broken tiles stick firmly to Kugami. Before long, Kugami was buried under a pile of tiles and completely unable to move. Minus could cancel calamity-type abilities, but could not erase actual physical items. These were abilities that Hiron had taken from the people he devoured the other day, and he could store and use them whenever he wanted. Because of this strange ability, Jiren wanted to experience all kinds of abilities, but the one he was most interested in belonged to the strongest man in humanity, and that person was right in front of him, and he doesn't see. Kugami turned around and asked how he knew that. Jiren replied that the human brain stored all kinds of information. In other words, he had full control over his information, and the situation was already looking bad. So he warned Inut to be careful. Hiron revealed that he could read minds, and even Mimimi had been a victim of his mental attack. He tried to extract emotions such as loss, emptiness and loneliness from Inut. Due to this pressure, Kugami was forced to lie. He insisted not that. That wasn't what I really meant. Inut coldly told him to be quiet for a moment. Kugami remained silent and didn't say another word. Jiren mocked humanity, saying that they were never united, and laughed at the thought that someone among the numbers who were supposed to protect humans would take the side of a calamity. Unable to speak or move, Kugami could only remain silent. But none of this affected Inoue, who remained calmly in the same position. Jiren started laughing ominously once more. While he was laughing, Minimi attacked him from behind. She yelled at him, asking why Inoue was standing there like a log. He also asked why Kugami had turned into a human cocoon. With his hands in his pockets, Inoue looked at Jiren from above and said that he really couldn't read his mind. What Jiren had seen was only the surface of human emotions, but a human's heart was much deeper and nobler. He summoned his huge sword glowing with light and declared that a calamity of Jiren's level was no match for his plan. Hino acknowledged Minami's speed, saying she didn't expect him to come so fast. She made an excuse, saying that she thought he was about to confess to Kanjuin, but when Saisaki appeared out of nowhere, she panicked and decided to help instead. It was the first time he had seen Jiren in the form of Saisaki, and even Inoue hadn't expected that they would meet so soon. He said he wanted to kill him at least 100 times. Otherwise, she would not feel satisfied. Jiren laughed at her, realizing that she was the one who had destroyed his other half. He said he was about to show her what real terror looked like. An intense pressure emanated from him. His knees and legs began to shake violently. Unable to bear it, he fell to his knees. It was the first time I experienced the spiritual pressure of a being of a special degree. And Nobuela picked up from the ground and told him that that wasn't even Jiren's complete form, and that he would only get stronger from now on. He added that the numbers feeling this pressure would come soon, so it would be better to entertain Jiren until then. Many tentacles sprouted from Jiren's neck as he challenged them, telling them to invite whoever they wanted. If those silly humans thought they could defeat him. Hearing his words, Minami became frustrated. Kugami wondered why Jiren thought they still had a chance to win. Jiren pointed his finger forward, and it began to glow red. Hino warned him to be careful, saying that Jiren was about to use Saisaki's lock, and told him to watch the direction of his arm. Jiren shot multiple bright keys at them, but both of them managed to dodge the attack. Minami activated a seal-breaking spell called the Bloody Requiem. He launched the Death Parade technique towards Jiren. He didn't even try to dodge, and just stood there laughing. The Death Parade hit the right side of his body. Still trapped under the rubble, Kugami wondered if they had finally won. This was a move that Hiren had already seen once, the same technique that had destroyed his other half. Hinobe took a step forward and summoned his Sword of Judgment. Jiren's body completely regenerated and multiple judgment swords appeared around him in a circular formation. The next instant, his body was torn into countless pieces by the blades. Hinobe thought that this was finally over for Jiren. As her upper body floated in the air, Hiren commented that Inoue's ability was something that purged evil, and touching her felt like her body was going to be completely erased. He continued, saying that right or wrong depended entirely on a person's judgment. Depending on how it was used, the same power could go in any direction, calling Inoue's technique a double-edged sword. Hearing those words, Inoue got angry and ran straight to him. Minami asked him what he was even trying to say. Suddenly, Jiren picked up a padlock and chained her in place. She couldn't move, but behind her, Inoue was already preparing to launch a special attack. He increased his speed instantly and chopped Jiren's head off, moving in a manner similar to how Zenitsu used his thunder breath. He said that even if cutting her torso wouldn't have worked, cutting her neck surely would. But to his surprise, cutting off his head didn't work either. While hanging upside down, Jiren calmly asked what Hinobe was planning to cut next. Hinobe cut Jiren's face into thousands of pieces. Even that didn't do any good. Minami asked what they were supposed to do now. Thousands of pieces of Jiren were floating above them in the air. It did hurt Jiren, as it took time for him to get back to normal, but the question remained whether this was really enough to stop him. They thought they were buying time, but in reality, it was Jiren who was buying time, until his reinforcements arrived. Suddenly, everyone felt a tremendous spiritual pressure. They tried to figure out where it was coming from, and Kugami realized the source of that pressure. It was the sign of a special grade door that had just appeared, and he wondered where it had appeared this time. All over Japan, citizens stared at the sky as everything around them turned red. Slowly, the door appeared horizontally on a huge tower. Jiren couldn't stop laughing, as he had finally achieved what he wanted. Suzuka ran in by opening a door and warned them about the appearance of a special grade door above the sky tower. Mimini panicked and asked what they should do next, but Inoue told her to calm down. He said that the opening of a special grade gate usually took years, and that all the numbers combined could defeat Jiren first and take care of the gate later. By then, Jiren had completely merged, although he was missing his left hand. Kugami quickly realized this and wondered why his left hand had disappeared. Jiren wouldn't rate the lock skill as SR without a reason, so he asked if anyone was curious to know. The lock skill was powerful, but the question remained why it was so important to Jiren. Jiren revealed that he possessed an ability called King of the Keys. In other words, it was a skill that ruled all the keys. He asked them what the real meaning of being locked up was, while a smile formed on his face. His left hand moved towards the special grade door that had just appeared. In that hand, a shiny key took shape, and Noah immediately understood what Jiren was trying to do. I was trying to unlock the door early using that power. Jiren praised him, calling him a wise man. The power of Moen began to emerge from Kugami. He went crazy once again, his eyes turned completely white. There was no way I was going to let that happen. Turn around, and bony structures that looked like a rib cage emerged from his chest. Those skeletal structures moved like strong, hardened tentacles and pounced on Kugami. Unable to predict the attack, he was caught almost instantly. The skeletal ribs completely enveloped him. What happened next? It was unclear whether he was teleported to another place or absorbed completely. Hinoge and Nini watched as he disappeared right in front of their eyes. Hiren smiled even more, knowing that with Kugami out of the way, nothing was getting in his way anymore. It was finally time to unlock the door. Jiren, disguised as Saiseki, used his unlocking ability to force the door open immediately. Disbelief spread among the citizens towards the numbers, as they had just witnessed a calamity of special degree. And now another door had appeared. A new calamity known as Aizen emerged from the gate high in the sky. The calamity descended by violently severing the sky tower as it landed on the ground. Seeing the humans below, a ghastly expression was drawn on his face, and he immediately started attacking them. In just a few moments, countless bodies lay strewn on the ground as Calamity seemed pleased to feed on the remains. Jiren watched the massacre with clear joy, encouraging Aizen to continue without restrictions. Enraged by Jiren's authoritarian tone, Aizen suddenly swallowed Jiren's hand and shouted that he would devour every last human. Disgusted by the taste, Aizen headed towards another group of humans, looking for more prey. People were screaming, running and hiding in despair as Calamity reveled in the fear that echoed around them. Meanwhile, Jiren was confronting Inoue and Minimi, enjoying the chaos unfolding exactly as he had planned. He explained that Aizen had been sealed for centuries due to its extreme violence, losing even a hand during that time. Hinoge and Mimimi exchanged somber glances, finally understanding the full scope of Hiren's plan. With a manic smile, Hiren praised himself for bringing all the numbers together as a feast for Aizen. He explained that fighting all the numbers alone would have been problematic, so he skillfully redirected them. Raising his hand to his chest, he admitted that he wanted to be alone with Inoue, which is why he attracted everyone else to Isen. Mimimi spoke with clear disgust, saying that Inoue despised people like him, and Inoue calmly nodded. Inoue immediately issued an emergency subjugation order to all numbers against the special grade Calamity, and Mimimi was instructed to help. Mimimi objected, insisting that they must first defeat Jiren together before facing Aizen. He scolded Inoue for always trying to carry everything alone, and argued that Kugami still needed to be saved. He firmly believed that the three of them together could take down Jiren. Hino smiled slightly, pleased by her subordinate's determination. Elsewhere, Aizen felt numb, satisfied after massacring almost everyone who was nearby, and started looking for more humans. He saw a man hiding with 2 children, but his attack was blocked by Kusanagi's skill at the last moment. Kusanagi's power failed to tear Aizen's arm, and Kiritsu continued with his special attack. Aizen remained completely unharmed, smiling smugly as Kiritsu and Yukibori argued in frustration. More numbers began to arrive on the scene to face the calamity. Lon and Kenjuin also arrived, ready for battle. Kagurasaka-san rushed to the scene, apologizing for his tardiness. She explained that the traffic lights had delayed her, prompting Kiritsu to tell her to ignore the traffic rules during emergencies. Aizen attempted a surprise attack on Kagurasaka from behind. She instantly counterattacked and scolded him for such cowardly behavior. With a grotesque smile, Aizen seemed excited to see so many numbers gathered. He sniffed the air and called his presence an exquisite smell. All the numbers present took up their fighting positions. Kugami realized that he was trapped inside Hiren's body, having been consumed before. I couldn't believe that it was possible to unlock a sealed door before its designated opening time. Unable to sense the outside world, he wondered if another calamity of a special degree had already appeared. He shouted at Jiren, demanding to be released, when a creepy structure formed above him. Numerous tentacles emerged and wrapped tightly around his body. The restraints tightened even more, restricting his movement completely. Jiren appeared before him in his original form, and coldly ordered him to be quiet. Apologizing mockingly, he said that he was about to turn the world upside down to. Upstairs, Jiren sealed Kugami's mouth, preventing him from speaking, forcing Kugami to quickly find another way out. Outside, the battle escalated as Inoue and Mimimi continued their fight against Jiren. Mimimi was worried about what would happen to Kugami if Jiren was killed while he was still inside. And Nob reassured her, saying that he had already assigned Suzuka to help Kugami, allowing them to fully concentrate on Jiren. Minimi unleashed his special technique, the Delica March, sending waves of musical notes crashing against him. Although Jiren was cut into pieces, his body regenerated instantly, causing Minimi to angrily yell at him to stop regenerating. Inoue jumped from above and discharged his judgment sword with decisive force. Jiren split his arm into countless tentacles and extended them towards Inoue. However, it was not Inoue whom he caught. Without Minimi, he placed it in front of him as a shield and challenged Inoue to attack if he dared. Fear flashed briefly on Minimi's face. Inoue, however, did not hesitate. Without hesitation, he hit straight through her position, landing the attack directly on Jiren. Jiren froze in surprise, unable to believe that Inoue would hurt a companion to reach him. But then Jiren realized that Mimimi was completely unharmed, and she immediately used her weapon to counterattack. Inoue's attacks only worked on souls recognized as evil, and their effect was even stronger on such targets. Minimi prepared to unleash the same attack that had worked on Gur the previous time. He activated his death barrel technique, but Hiren tried to escape from his grasp at the last moment. Meanwhile, Suzuka was struggling to open a door leading to Kugami. But it was extremely difficult, as the target was constantly moving. She asked them to give her a little more time, when suddenly someone appeared behind her, saying that it was her turn to join the battle. Numerous deadly skulls manifested out of nowhere and completely surrounded. Complete to Jiren. It was Kurusu who had come from behind. Hinobe questioned him, saying that he had ordered Kurusu to help the others. At the same time, Suzuka received a communication signal. It was a message from Kanhuin. Mimimi asked if they had already taken care of the special grade calamity. On his side, Kanjuin was bleeding profusely and apologized for contacting them in such a state. He revealed that all the numbers there had been wiped out by the calamity. None of them could still stand, although she believed that they could have finished it with a single Sekirin Kaiku. However, the last time everyone used their Sekirin Kaiku together, the Aizen calamity devoured the attacks instead. He even claimed that the taste of Sekirin Kaiku was delicious. Aizen even praised the technique, comparing it to food prepared by the chef of a 5-star hotel. Now they no longer had enough energy to use it again, and defeating Aizen without securing Kaiku seemed impossible. Suddenly, Calamity charged forward and threw a powerful punch at them. The impact caused a massive explosion throughout the area. The explosion knocked all 5 of them down at once. Yukibori called Kanjuin a genius and desperately asked if there was still any way to defeat the monster. She replied that her Metsuku had already been devoured, leaving her powerless. And unless someone had a dreamlike ability to override the powers of Calamity, defeating Aizen was impossible. Suddenly, he straightened up as he realized something. Everyone felt a surge of hope as they realized that Kugami's minus ability could give them a chance. Kei seemed visibly unhappy again, feeling overshadowed by Kugami. Still, for the sake of humanity, they had no choice but to trust him. Only now did they really understand why Inoue always called him the hope of humanity. Although their energy was running out, they were still numbers. And they resolved to stop the special grade Calamity together, no matter the cost. They decided to stand their ground and keep fighting until Kugami arrived as reinforcement. Hino asked Suzuka if she could locate Kugami, and she confirmed that she had found her position. He immediately told him to open a guide door directly in front of Kugami, protecting him from the horrible scene inside. He tried his best to open it. Blood started dripping from his nose as he continued to force the door open. Completely focused on the task, her condition worsened, but she refused to stop. Meanwhile, the remaining numbers were desperately fighting against the special grade Calamity. Kei was getting more and more frustrated by how long Kugami was taking, while everyone was counting on him. He shouted at Kugami to hurry up and get there at once. It seemed that his prayers had finally been answered. A guide door opened directly behind the special grade Calamity, Aizen. Kugami instantly realized that this enemy was not Hiren. He clenched his fist, channeling Mugen's power into it. With a single blow, he crushed Calamity's head, sending it crashing to the ground. What had happened inside Hiren was that Kugami had been desperately asking for help. Suddenly, a guide door appeared in front of him. Although he assumed that Suzuka had opened it, he had no idea where it would be sent. The moment he arrived, he realized that he was in a completely different place. And in front of him was a newly appeared special grade Calamity, so he instantly clenched his fist in an attempt to knock down Aizen with him to the ground. Suddenly, everyone was all smiles except for Kei. Well, everyone knew that Kane didn't really show his feelings. Aizen was so heavy that when he fell to the ground, the area around him also cracked. Kugami asked if everyone was okay. He hadn't landed yet, but Aizen woke up from the ground and tried to bite him. Aizen got angry because he was just filling his stomach when someone interrupted his meal. That's why he attacked Kugami, intending to eat him too. Kugami instantly used his divine retribution Sekirin. A strange smile appeared on Aizen's face as if he was looking at something delicious. He tried to absorb all of Kugami's Sekirin Kaiku. His companions tried to warn him, but Kugami didn't need to worry, as he had an ability that could stop Aizen. He used his minus ability to cancel out the energy flowing into Aizen's mouth. The energy stopped flowing, leaving Aizen confused about what had happened. Kugami raised several tentacles that wrapped around his hand. He extended his arm towards Aizen, directing them towards him. Aizen recognized the technique as it was similar to Hiren's, but he was completely trapped. As he extended his other hand, Kugami said that he would use Aizen's own power against him. He activated the Devour ability, but instead of absorbing anything, the energy began to accumulate in his hand. He then threw a punch at Aizen using the accumulated energy. The punch sent Aizen flying far away and caused a massive explosion. However, it was not Aizen who got fired, but his right arm, and he realized it too late. By the time he realized it, his severed arm was already bleeding nonstop. Everyone was relieved to see that Kugami had dealt a big blow to Aizen. Even Kei was smiling without noticing, but once she noticed it, she quickly stopped. He began to complain that anyone with such a skill could do the same. Even after losing his arm, he grew back several new ones, leaving him with 6 arms. Enraged, he declared that he would kill Kogen. Suddenly, he tried to grab him and whip him to the ground. Wait a second. Was that a reference to Naruto? Kugami just used a jutsu. Yes, it was the same ability he once used against Hiren called Split. Many clones of him appeared and attacked Aizen. He was beaten repeatedly, quickly, leaving him unable to respond. Together, they kept attacking until he was overwhelmed. The punches caused a lot of damage, but they still weren't enough to completely knock him down. Aizen wondered how strong Kagami really was, being unilaterally beaten by a human, and refused to recognize him as such. However, Aizen was not someone who could be defeated so easily. He jumped up again, attempting another lash to the ground. This time, it floated up, and began to swell like a balloon, blocking the sunlight. It seemed to be absorbing solar energy from the sun. He then unleashed a powerful attack on Kagami. Since it was a shockwave produced by Aizen's roar, Kagami couldn't cancel it out with his minus skill. With nowhere to escape to, he was about to be hit, but suddenly he was pulled out of range. It was Kei's skill that saved him by an instantaneous movement. Kagami was surprised that Kei saved him, and thanked him. Kei, still acting nonchalantly, told him to shut up and concentrate on the fight. He said he wouldn't let Kagami take all the credit. It was the first time they had fought together. Kagami tried to suggest a strategy, but Kei refused to take orders from someone who wasn't even a number. Meanwhile, in the battle against Hiren, they received news that Kagami had arrived on time, and things were going well there. As Hiren had no moves left, Inui asked him to surrender. Jiren couldn't stop laughing, as everything kept going according to his plan. And Inui asked everyone to leave the next calamity to him, and they all agreed. Jiren spread his tentacles all over the area. Inui spoke calmly, stating that Jiren's sense of justice was vague and easy to break. That was fine, since I had no intention of representing the justice of humanity. Instead, he would rely on his own judgment, his judgment skill, which was created for that very purpose. He unleashed his sacred to Kirin Kaiku, divine punishment and judgment. A golden light was falling like blades. His posture remained calm, as if the verdict had already been handed down. A massive symbol appeared behind Hiren as Inui stood before him, shining with a holy light. The sentence was already decided. Jiren pretended to call for help, acting like he couldn't move. The absolute death trial was a technique that never failed, and always imparted justice. A sacred and divine sword was pointed directly at Jiren, ready to pierce through him. It was the hour of a heavenly judgment. Jiren smiled, and pronounced only one name, Kuro Kyoko. He continued to smile as if that name could save him. Hino asked why he said that name. Jiren then asked her if she wanted her beloved Kyoko back. She was the one Hino lost 6 years ago, the moment she saved Kagami, and lost everything else.